Brienne stood in the great hall of the Red Keep with her sword sheathed at her side, feeling the eyes of lords, ladies, and courtiers upon her. The murmured hush that fell over the assembled crowd was more unsettling than the raucous clamor of battlefields she had grown so accustomed to. Over time she had learned to navigate the complexities of courtly life, but it still did not come as easily to her as a well-timed parry. Her heart pounded behind the plate of her white enameled armor. Once, she had worn battered metal, dirty and unremarkable, except for its massive size compared to the men around her. Now she was garbed in the pristine regalia of the Kingsguard, anointed as a sworn shield of the crown. She caught a glimpse of herself in a mirrored surface of a pillar behind the dais, and for a moment she almost did not recognize the tall figure she saw. Her hair was shorn to a practical length that brushed her ears, and her cheeks had the slightest flush of nerves. The swirl of the thick cloak at her shoulders was embroidered with the lion and the stag, though soon it would bear the newly adjusted sigil to reflect the change on the throne. The white cloak marked her membership in a hallowed brotherhood she had once believed she could never truly join. She had never quite felt welcomed in any place, let alone in the company of knights. Yet here she was, faced with something that seemed larger than her, and she braced for the moment when she would be told the outcome. King Bran, the broken Bran Stark as he had once been known, sat upon the Iron Throne, though now it was less a seat of swords and more a careful reconstruction that symbolized a new era after the wars and dragons and chaos. He regarded Brienne with a composed yet piercing gaze. Beside him stood the ever-watchful Ser Podrick Payne, no longer the boy who had fumbled the straps of saddles and tried so earnestly to serve as a squire without letting his insecurities drown him. He was a knight now, one of the finest in the realm, and his devotion to Brienne over the years showed in the unwavering trust on his face. Tyrion Lannister sat in his seat of Hand of the King, short legs dangling, fingers curled around the arms of his chair, his expression carefully neutral. Some might have expected that Jaime Lannister's death, and Cersei's downfall, would have left a permanent shadow over the Lannister name. Yet Tyrion had managed to remain indispensable to the realm, guiding many of the political decisions that formed a fragile peace. He gave Brienne a subtle nod, which she answered with a small dip of her head. The hush in the great hall thickened, pressing in on them like fog. Bran's voice was soft yet carried the authority of the realm. "Ser Brienne of Tarth," he said, dispensing with the formalities that might otherwise weigh this moment down with an overlong ceremony. "I have heard counsel from my hand, and from the Lords Paramount. We speak of the need to restore the Kingsguard to its highest state of honor and duty. We speak of the vow to protect the weak, to serve the realm, to uphold justice." He paused, his young features steady with a wisdom far beyond his years. "In recognition of your unwavering loyalty, your proven prowess, and your dedication to the oaths you have sworn, I would name you Lord Commander of the Kingsguard." A tremor of disbelief and pride coursed through Brienne, and though the entire hall saw that flicker of emotion across her face, she quickly mastered herself. Lord Commander. Only in her wildest imaginings could she have foreseen such an honor. She saw faces in the crowd, Ser Davos Seaworth at a distance offering her a small, encouraging smile, Sansa Stark, now Lady of Winterfell, who regarded Brienne with the warm gratitude of a friend and protector. Arya Stark was absent from court, having departed on her own journeys. Brienne's gaze returned to the king. She swallowed and bowed her head in humble acceptance. "I am unworthy of such a distinction, your grace," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the stillness. "But I will give all that I am to serve you, to protect you, and to maintain the honor of the Kingsguard." King Bran's expression did not change. He had grown distant in certain ways, but not unkind. "And so you shall," he answered. "Rise, Lord Commander." The applause rippled through the hall, starting hesitant and growing in magnitude. Warriors and highborn alike clapped for her, some out of genuine respect, others perhaps out of courtly obligation. But in that moment it did not matter. She felt the echo of her father's approval, the memory of Renly Baratheon's trusting eyes, the gratitude of Jaime Lannister in the final days of his life. Most of all, she felt the weight of her vow to protect the living with unflagging determination and to shape the realm into something better. When it ended, Tyrion stood to address the assembly. The new Lord Commander recited the oath to defend the king, to keep his secrets, to obey his commands, to serve in chivalry. She spoke the words distinctly, each syllable echoing in her heart like a promise renewed. Then she bowed once more to Bran, and Tyrion signaled that the ceremony was complete. The throng of courtiers began to disperse, with some of the more important lords waiting near the dais to exchange a word or two with the king and his hand. Brienne exhaled a breath she had not known she was holding. She felt a hand on her shoulder, and she turned to see Podrick Payne beaming up at her with unalloyed pride. "Lord Commander," he said, admiration sparkling in his eyes. "I can't think of anyone else who deserves it more. I'm so happy for you." She felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Ser Podrick," she replied, using his formal title to honor his own journey. "We have come a long way, haven't we?" "We have," he agreed, face bright. "And there is more to come." They exchanged a smile, recalling the roads they had traveled, from the Riverlands to the north, to King's Landing, through betrayals, losses, and triumphs. If fate had a design, it had led them both to this moment, standing in the great hall, no longer uncertain vagrants but knights of the realm who commanded genuine respect. Brienne excused herself with a respectful nod to Podrick and made her way to the side of the dais where Tyrion lingered. The hand of the king was greeting well-wishers, but when he saw her approach, he lifted a hand to wave off a sycophantic lord in mid-sentence. Tyrion's sharp eyes twinkled. "Lord Commander, I think I shall have to get used to calling you that," he said in a playful tone. Brienne smiled faintly. "I never thought I would see the day. Thank you, my lord, for your faith in me. I know it couldn't have been an easy decision." Tyrion's expression turned sincere. "The choice was obvious. You are the only one who has shown again and again that you serve duty above all. And the realm needs that more than it needs politics or cunning or even skill with a blade, though you have plenty of that as well. It needs the light of honest knighthood." She met his gaze. In that moment, she recalled how he and Jaime had once been so close, how Jaime had shared with her pieces of himself that he never showed anyone else. "I will do my utmost," she said quietly. "For King Bran, for Westeros, for the memory of those who have fallen." Tyrion nodded, his eyes flickering with a hint of sorrow. For them indeed. She understood whom he was thinking of, Jaime, who had perished in the wreckage of King's Landing beside his sister. Though Brienne had felt her heart twist at the end of his story, she also held tight to the truth of who Jaime was at his core in his final days. She had seen a part of him no one else had, and she had come to trust that better nature. She carried that memory now like a shield of her own. No further words were needed between them. Tyrion turned to greet another petitioner, and Brienne stepped back, letting the swirl of the court's activity resume around her. Yet all she could think of was the new burden, the new responsibility. Lord Commander. She would have to recruit more knights, fill the ranks that had been decimated by the war. With so many lost, Ser Barristan, Ser Meryn, Ser Oswell, and others across the years, the Kingsguard was but a shadow of what it had been. If the realm was truly to enter an era of stability, its protectors needed to be men and women of unassailable character and skill. She had much to do. She left the great hall, her tall frame cutting through the crowd gracefully, and made her way out into the courtyard beyond, where the sun shone on the pavers and guards stood at attention. She inhaled deeply, letting the warm air anchor her in the present moment. Her eyes swept over the ramparts, the newly fortified walls, and the city below. The stench of King's Landing was still present. The usual smells of fish, dung, sweat, and the pungent aromas of a crammed population. But there was a feeling of cautious optimism in the air, a new leaf turning. Ser Balon Swan was waiting near the entry, adjusting the white cloak he wore over his armor. One of the surviving Kingsguard from the previous reign, he was a knight of moderate reputation, a skilled fighter but not as extraordinary as legends like Barristan Selmy. Still, he had proven loyal during the upheavals that led to King Bran's ascension. "My lady," he said, catching himself. "Lord Commander, I should say. I am at your disposal." His deference surprised her, but she was determined to earn and maintain it. "Thank you, Ser Balon," she replied. "We will have much to discuss, you and I. The Kingsguard requires new knights, and I want your counsel on who might be worth recruiting." "Of course," he said. "I know of a few good men who fought valiantly in the wars and earned respect. Though in truth, many of the greatest knights have scattered, left for their own holdings or died." Brienne nodded. "All the more reason to find those who remain. If we must rebuild the Kingsguard, let us do it properly this time. I will not have another group of glorified swords for hire. Each recruit will be weighed in character, not just in skill." She could see by the flicker in Balon's eyes that he was not entirely used to this approach. "Yes, Lord Commander," he said carefully. I will give you a list of names soon. They spoke for a few minutes longer, discussing the practicalities, and then parted ways. Brienne walked through the stone corridors, past the royal apartments, and to the wing that housed the Kingsguard. She paused by the White Book, that massive tome recording the deeds of each knight who served. It had survived the war, though it bore some charred edges from the chaos when Daenerys Targaryen's dragon had set parts of the Red Keep aflame. Brienne's name was written within, her deeds chronicled by the Lord Commander before her, whoever had last set pen to parchment. She could guess it had been Jaime's hand, though the pages that recorded the final days of his life and service would have been left incomplete. A pang of sadness shot through her chest. She ran her finger gently along the spine of the White Book. One of her first tasks would be to fill in the blank spaces, to see that the record of knights who had served was properly updated, and to add her own experiences, those she was permitted to share. Some secrets must remain sealed in her heart, too precious or dangerous to be aired publicly. But she would do her duty, continuing the tradition that Jaime had once resumed after Ser Barristan's departure. Lost in thought, she did not notice Ser Podrick approaching. He cleared his throat, and she turned, giving him a small smile. "Podrick," she said with warmth, "is everything all right?" He nodded eagerly. "Yes, Lord Commander. I simply wanted to see if you needed anything." "I overheard you speaking with Ser Balon. If there's to be a search for new recruits, I'd be glad to assist." Brienne exhaled a breath that turned into a soft chuckle. "I'm not used to being called Lord Commander by you. But if that's how it must be, then so be it. Podrick, yes, I would appreciate your help. I trust you more than most. We need to find knights who have done more than just wield a sword. Men or women who have shown bravery, loyalty, and mercy. We cannot have a Kingsguard that's just a group of skilled killers." Podrick's eyes shone. "I agree wholeheartedly. There was a knight from the Reach who fought for the Tyrells, Ser Illifer, I believe his name was. And a woman knight sworn to House Royce in the Vale, Ser Alisanda, reputed to be quite formidable." Brienne nodded, mind already turning over the possibilities. "Yes, I've heard of Ser Alisanda. She was rumored to have a gentle manner off the battlefield and an unbreakable resolve in combat. Exactly the kind of knight we need." They made plans to send raven letters to summon or at least gauge interest. Brienne also considered traveling in person. She always preferred to see a knight's mettle firsthand to measure the sort of moral fiber that might lie behind courtesy. But for now, a raven would suffice. In the weeks that followed, the newly minted Lord Commander found herself inundated with responsibilities that once would have been shared among her peers. But the Kingsguard was dangerously thin, and those who remained, Ser Balon, Ser Podrick, and 2 others who had been confirmed under King Bran's reign, were nearly as overworked as she was. Every day brought a new matter of security at court, petty squabbles between lords, attempts to bribe or influence the king, rumors of subversion from discontented nobles who had hoped for a different successor to the Iron Throne. Through it all, Brienne kept her composure. She had never cared for politics, but she recognized that part of being Lord Commander was navigating these currents to ensure the king's safety. She soon realized that the greatest challenge was not fending off swords and daggers, but dealing with words and whispers. One morning, she stood behind King Bran's throne as he listened to a petition from a group of Dornish envoys. They spoke politely, but Brienne sensed the tension in the air. Dorne had always kept itself apart from the 7 kingdoms in many ways, and the Targaryen wars had stirred old resentments. She watched the envoys' expressions, the flick of their eyes, the tone of their voices for any sign that they plotted more than just peaceful coexistence. She did not fancy herself a spy master, but her instincts honed by countless journeys and battles told her to remain vigilant. Tyrion skillfully fielded most of the envoys' statements, while Bran, with his uncanny insight, listened calmly, occasionally offering a disconcerting remark that suggested he saw far more than was being said. When the envoys finally withdrew, Brienne escorted the king to his private solar, accompanied by Tyrion. She watched over them as they settled down to speak quietly. She waited by the door, her presence as silent as the faithful sentinel she was meant to be. They spoke of the matter of uniting the realm, the repeated challenges of the Iron Islands, and the continuing negotiations to keep the North fully aligned without forcing it. Sansa Stark, now queen in the North in name if not in practice, was cooperative, but her people guarded their hard-won independence. There was also the matter of the Riverlands, once ravaged by war, now tentatively rebuilding. Brienne knew the region well, having traveled it in search of the Stark girls. Finally, Tyrion turned to her. Lord Commander, your input is valuable here. You've seen more of the realm's troubles than anyone. Do you believe there's any real threat that certain regions might still revolt? Bran's gaze rested on her, too. He did not say anything, but she could feel the attention keenly. Brienne cleared her throat. Your Grace, my Lord Hand, I believe that those who have lost the most are the ones we must watch. They are desperate, and desperation can drive a man or woman to violence. In the Riverlands, many peasants still suffer from the aftereffects of the wars. In the Reach, there is bitterness over the extinction of House Tyrell, though that bitterness is not as openly displayed as one might expect. In Dorne, I sense they hold their secrets close, but so far, they seem inclined to stand by the decisions of the new crown, provided they are given enough autonomy. She paused, searching for words. If any open conflict arises, I believe it will come from lords who feel they have no place in this new order, or from those who resent how the war ended. Tyrion nodded slowly. Sound reasoning. We must ensure that such lords are kept close, or at least watched. Lord Commander, I'd like you to coordinate with the City Watch and Lord Bronn of the Blackwater to ensure that any rumors of sedition are investigated calmly and carefully. We do not want to incite rebellion by being overly harsh, but we must not allow it to fester. Brienne bowed. Yes, my Lord Hand. She glanced at the king, who offered her a gentle nod. She could almost sense his gratitude. He did not need to say it. His presence was enough. In his strange and quiet way, Bran Stark seemed to trust her as deeply as anyone could. That night, she took up her quarters in the Kingsguard Tower, which felt unsettlingly large now that so many members were gone. She dined simply: bread, salted beef, a stew of onions and carrots, and thought over the tasks ahead. She missed the simpler days of riding across the countryside with Podrick, searching for Sansa or Arya, with a clear purpose driving her. The swirl of politics and the thickness of palace intrigue weighed on her more heavily than a full suit of plate. But she had vowed to serve the realm, and this too was service. Before retiring, she took up a quill and visited the White Book. Carefully, she flipped to Jaime Lannister's entry. Tears threatened her eyes as she read the concluding paragraph, written in her own script, detailing how he had fought to protect the living in the war for the Dawn, how he had journeyed north to help defeat the army of the dead. She had not shied away from mentioning his complexities, but she had given him the honor that was due. She remembered how it felt to write those last words, how final it was. Closing that chapter had been one of the hardest tasks of her life. But she had done it, and now she continued to turn the pages to the new entries. There was hers, a condensed version so far, lacking much of her recent deeds because no one had set them down. She dipped her quill and continued, detailing her appointment as Lord Commander, feeling the gravity of the moment as ink flowed onto parchment. Her letters were crisp and bold, unlike the fine, looping calligraphy of scribes. But they were honest, each stroke a testament to the truth of her journey. She wrote of how she came to King's Landing, how she had served King Bran by capturing remnants of the Golden Company who refused to yield, and how she had worked to maintain peace among fractious lords. She left out the private details, the heartbreaks, the memories of nights spent doubting herself. Those were her own. When she finished, she gazed at the drying ink. There was still much space left on the page, as if to say her story was far from over. Brienne whispered a quiet vow to herself, that she would fill these pages with deeds worthy of a true knight, that she would not fail the trust placed in her. Months passed in a flurry of duties and expansions of the royal guard. Ser Balon located 3 knights of good repute, and Brienne herself invited Ser Alessandra Royce and Ser Illifer. She held rigorous tests in the courtyard of the Red Keep. Knights from various houses came to try their arms, hoping for the prestige of a white cloak. But Brienne refused to accept any who relied solely on skill at arms. She questioned them about their conduct, their prior service, their understanding of honor. Many left disappointed when they discovered that none of their old cunning or empty braggadocio swayed the Lord Commander. The final selection yielded 7 knights, forming a full Kingsguard once more, though 2 were women, Brienne and Alessandra. This caused some rumbles of discontent among traditionalists, but after so many upheavals and with King Bran's open-minded approach, most accepted it or quietly swallowed their complaints. Podrick Payne stood among them, proud and true. Ser Balon Swan kept his post, as did Ser Alden Seri, a soft-spoken man from the Shield Islands who had proven his mettle in skirmishes. Ser Illifer, newly arrived from the Reach, showed himself to be not only a fierce fighter but a man devoted to defending the innocent. Ser Alessandra Royce, tall and broad-shouldered, matched Brienne almost in size, though without her raw physical power. Nonetheless, her quickness and skill were remarkable. The final seat went to a knight from the Stormlands, Ser Marek Storm, a bastard who had fought under Gendry Baratheon's banner and displayed unwavering courage. Once the appointments were confirmed, the newly filled Kingsguard assembled in the yard. They lined up in their resplendent white cloaks, armor shining under the sun. Brienne stood at their head, fully aware that hundreds of eyes were upon her. She could feel the weight of tradition, the memory of Kingsguard past. Ser Arthur Dayne, Ser Barristan and Selmy, Ser Duncan the Tall, and even Jaime Lannister. She drew in a deep breath and spoke, her voice carrying the authority she had learned to project. You are the protectors of the king, the shield of the realm, and the living embodiment of what knighthood should be. None of us are perfect, but we strive for honor, courtesy, bravery, and loyalty. We will not forget who we serve, King Bran, and through him, the people of Westeros. Our swords are pledged to defend the weak and uphold justice. We shall keep our vows until the day we die. She saw earnestness in each face, Podrick's shining devotion, Alisandra's fierce pride, Illifer's calm resolve, Marek's restless energy, Balon's steady watchfulness, Alden's quiet determination. The courtyard erupted in a smattering of applause and cheers, though many remained silent, perhaps still unsure about this new era. Brienne did not need their open approval. She only needed to serve. Over the next few weeks, the city bustled with unseasonably lively festivities. Harvests had been good, trade was reviving, and many small folk felt that King Bran's gentle hand allowed them a chance to breathe and rebuild. Queen Sansa Stark visited from the north, a retinue of Stark bannermen at her side to discuss trade routes and mutual support. Lord Gendry Baratheon came from Storm's End, bringing fresh news of the Stormlands. Lord Royce and other Vale lords arrived, and from them Brienne learned that Daenerys's old armies, those unsullied who had departed across the sea, were no longer a concern. The Dothraki, too, had scattered, though a small contingent remained in the plains beyond Volantis. In short, the immediate threats that had once brought war to Westeros were no more. The only threat that remained was the endless human capacity for division and greed. As Lord Commander, Brienne spent her time organizing patrols around the Red Keep and the city, ensuring that any sign of unrest was addressed fairly. She insisted on courtesy from the guards toward the common folk, remembering how the abuses of the city watch under Joffrey had fueled hatred. She also spent hours in the training yard with her knights, leading drills and practicing with them until sweat drenched their cloaks. Some knights grumbled that a woman bested them, but most adjusted in time to the relentless demands of their new commander. And as they saw her skill, her sense of justice, and her unwavering dedication, even the most skeptical among them learned respect. One afternoon, when the sun was high, she was sparring with Ser Alessandra. The two women circled each other. Alessandra was armed with a longsword and shield, while Brienne wielded Oathkeeper, her Valyrian steel sword. A small crowd of guards and knights observed, transfixed, as sparks flew from the ringing steel. Alessandra was quick, trying to angle around Brienne's left flank, but Brienne read her movements, pivoting and slamming her shield forward. The force knocked Alessandra back a step. She grinned, sweat glistening on her brow, and retaliated with a swift overhead blow. Brienne caught it on her shield, then twisted Oathkeeper in a cunning arc that pried Alessandra's sword aside. In a heartbeat, the tip of the Valyrian steel was at Alessandra's neck. Alessandra let out a breathless laugh. "You are as formidable as they say, Lord Commander." Brienne inclined her head, stepping back. "You're skilled as well. Your footwork is impressive. Perhaps next time, a feint to the left before the overhead strike would catch me off guard." Alessandra nodded thoughtfully. "I'll keep that in mind." They parted to rest, and Podrick approached with 2 cups of cool water. The yard's watchers murmured with admiration and some disbelief that they had just witnessed 2 women displaying such prowess. Brienne, for her part, felt a flicker of pride in Alessandra's skill and in the example they set together. Later that day, as Brienne and Podrick walked through the Red Keep, they came across Sansa Stark in a corridor lit by tall windows. She was flanked by a few northern guards, though in the capital she was technically under the protection of the Kingsguard. When Sansa saw Brienne, her face brightened. My lady, Brienne said, bowing with respect, though in truth Sansa now outranked her in every sense. Sansa extended her hand and Brienne took it lightly, pressing it in greeting. I heard rumors that we now have a full Kingsguard once more, Sansa said, smiling. I am glad to see that, Brienne. Though none of them, I'm sure, can match my sworn sword. Brienne felt warmth in her chest at the acknowledgement. She had once sworn to protect Sansa and that oath had guided her through dangerous days. I am honored, my queen, she said softly. You appear well. I hope the city has been treating you kindly. It has, Sansa replied with a trace of relief. Though I still prefer the north. The air here feels thick and the politics thicker still. You must be drowning in it as Lord Commander. Brienne offered a wry smile. It is a different kind of battle. But I'll manage so long as I can uphold my duties. I'm glad you are here though. The king would welcome your counsel, I'm sure. Sansa nodded. I've spoken with Bran and with Tyrion. We have a few points to settle about trade and boundaries. But I think they will be resolved soon. She paused, glancing at Podrick with an approving nod. Sir Podrick, you look very fine in your new cloak. Podrick flushed with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. Thank you, my lady, my queen, he corrected, stumbling over the title. Sansa smiled gently at his fluster. Then her expression grew thoughtful. Brienne, she said more quietly, I worry sometimes about the stability of the realm. I know our enemies were defeated, but the realm is large and old wounds remain. And there are always those who covet power. Brienne inclined her head in understanding. I share your concerns. We do what we can, maintain vigilance, enforce justice, show fairness. If we keep the peace and ensure people feel safe, resentment may fade. But it will take years, perhaps generations. Sansa squeezed Brienne's hand once more. I'm glad you're here. I trust you more than I trust most. That is a comfort in these uncertain times. With that, they parted ways and the day continued, an endless flow of duties, from escorting envoys to checking on guard rotations. Brienne welcomed the tasks, for busyness kept her mind from wandering into shadows of the past. That evening, she returned to her chambers late, her limbs sore from training, her eyes heavy. Just as she was about to remove her armor, a knock came at the door. Podrick entered, his expression serious. Lord Commander, he said, there's been an incident in Flea Bottom. One of the gold cloaks was found dead, apparently murdered while investigating rumors of a new gang extorting merchants. The City Watch requests our help. Brienne sighed, setting down her gauntlets. Murder in Flea Bottom is nothing new, but we cannot ignore it. A gang that dares to kill the City Watch might soon grow bold enough to threaten the Crown's authority. We must show them that law still holds in King's Landing. She looked at the exhaustion on Podrick's face. You must be tired, Pod. Go rest. I'll handle this with Ser Marek. But Podrick shook his head. I can go with you if you like. I'm not so tired. Besides, the watch may need more than just 2 swords. This could be dangerous. Brienne considered it for a moment, her sense of responsibility warring with her desire to give her knights some reprieve. Podrick's eyes were determined, though, and she relented. Very well. Let's gather Ser Marek and Ser Alessandra. The 4 of us will go into Flea Bottom. A short while later, they rode through the cramped, winding streets. Dusk had settled and torches cast flickering shadows on uneven walls. The smells of rotting waste and unwashed bodies assaulted their noses. The small folk huddled around fires in alleys or behind shuttered windows. When the Kingsguard approached in their white cloaks, some scurried away as if expecting a harsh crackdown. They found the City Watch's local post, a dilapidated building that served as a minor barracks. Several gold cloaks stood around, anxious. Their captain greeted Brienne, removing his helm. Lord Commander, we're honored. I didn't expect the Kingsguard to come personally. Brienne met his gaze gravely. I serve the king and the city, Captain. Now tell me everything. He led them to a small courtyard where the slain watchman's body lay covered by a tattered cloth. Brienne knelt and lifted the cloth. The watchman's throat was slashed, his blood dark and dried on his uniform. She pressed her lips into a grim line. The captain explained that the watchmen had been investigating a group calling themselves the Black Fists, rumored to be extorting local merchants and peasants for protection money. The watchmen had ventured into the alleys alone, following a lead, but never returned. Brienne stood, her voice firm. Show me where it happened. The captain led the way, weaving through narrow passageways until they arrived at a claustrophobic alley lined with broken barrels and crates. Blood still stained the ground where the watchman had fallen. Brienne crouched, examining footprints and signs of struggle. She could see scuff marks on the stone, evidence of a violent confrontation. As they investigated, a young girl emerged from the shadows, her big eyes reflecting torchlight. She wore ragged clothing and clutched a small wooden doll. Brienne noticed her immediately but said nothing, instead stepping carefully closer. She knelt down, trying not to appear threatening. "It's all right," she said gently. "We won't hurt you." The girl didn't speak, just stared at the ground. But Brienne produced a small handkerchief from her pocket and held it out. "You look cold. Could you tell us what happened here?" A moment passed in tense silence, then the girl took the handkerchief, pressing it to her thin shoulders. Her voice trembled. I saw men corner the watchmen. 3 of them. They wore black cloth over their faces. One had a knife big, sharp. He told the watchman to go away or die, and the watchman said he was doing his duty. Then the man with the knife laughed and cut him. The watchman tried to fight, but there were too many. Brienne's jaw clenched. "Did you see where these men went?" The girl hesitated, eyes darting toward a side alley. "They go into the old tannery near the end of the row. I've seen them. They hide there sometimes." Brienne nodded. "Thank you. That was brave of you to tell us." She rose and gestured for Ser Alisanda, Ser Marek, and Podrick to follow. The captain of the watch wanted to come too, but Brienne held up a hand. "Captain, keep your men alert, but do not start a riot in Flea Bottom. We'll go and see if this rumor has truth." He looked torn, but acquiesced, stepping back. The 4 knights pressed on through the warren of alleys until they reached the old tannery, a squat building reeking of decades of cured hides and chemicals. Most of its windows were boarded up, but a flicker of light shone through a gap in the planks. Brienne motioned for silence. The knights drew their swords. She touched her finger to her lips, then pointed for Podrick to circle around one side, Alisanda around the other, while she and Marek approached the front. Carefully, they pressed against the wooden door, which gave a groan of protest. Inside, they could hear voices. Brienne caught fragments of conversation. Talk of collecting coin, of taking out any who poke their noses, the smug tone of men who believed themselves untouchable. She steeled herself. These were not lords or knights. They were common criminals who killed without remorse. That did not mean they were not dangerous. Without warning, Brienne shoved the door open, stepping into a dimly lit space. A lantern swung from a rope overhead, casting wavering light on half a dozen figures gathered around a table. The reek of old leather and unwashed bodies mingled in the air. Their heads snapped up in alarm. One reached for a dagger. Another scrambled for a crossbow propped against a barrel. "Drop your weapons," Brienne commanded, her voice ringing in the cramped space. "In the name of King Bran Stark." For a moment it seemed they might comply, but then one of them, a brute with a scar across his cheek, lunged at her with a cudgel. Brienne parried with Oathkeeper, the steel biting into the wood of the cudgel and splitting it. Another man tried to shoot her with a crossbow, but Ser Marek lunged, knocking the bow aside with his shield. The bolt skittered harmlessly against a wall. Chaos erupted. Podrick and Alisanda burst in through side openings, surprising 2 more criminals trying to flee. Blades flashed in the lantern light. Brienne advanced on the man who had lunged at her, forcing him back with powerful cuts. He swung a broken cudgel at her helm, and she felt the impact jolt her teeth, but her armor held. She slammed her shield into him, sending him crashing onto a moldy pile of old hides. With a quick pivot, she put Oathkeeper's point at his throat, her eyes blazing. "Stay down," she hissed. Nearby, Podrick deftly disarmed one of the gang members, twisting the man's wrist and sending his knife clattering to the floor. Ser Alisanda blocked a strike from another thug, while Ser Marek wrestled a third to the ground, pressing a dagger to his throat. In moments, the fight was over. 2 criminals lay dead. They had fought viciously and refused to yield. 4 more were subdued, kneeling with hands behind their heads, breathing heavily and cursing. Brienne scanned the scene, ensuring no further threat remained. She gestured for Podrick to bind them. Turning to the man beneath Oathkeeper's tip, she demanded, "Who leads the Black Fists?" He spat on the floor. "I won't talk to the likes of you." Brienne applied a bit more pressure with her sword, and his eyes flicked to it nervously. "You killed a member of the City Watch. We have witnesses. You'll hang if you don't cooperate." His face paled. Flea-bottom criminals knew well how brutal the king's justice could be. He swallowed hard. We were led by Karen. He's not here. He's got a bigger plan, said we'll carve out our own corner of this city. No more bowing to high lords. That's all I know, I swear. Brienne narrowed her eyes, trying to gauge the truth. Where is Karen? The man stammered. He's got hideouts. This was one of them. He might be in the old brewery on Tanner Street, or the warehouse near the docks. I really don't know. She studied him for a tense moment, then relented. Fine. You'll face the king's justice for your crimes. Perhaps your willingness to speak will be noted. With that, she and the other knights marched the captured criminals outside. The watch captain was waiting, and his men quickly took them into custody, shackling them and hauling them off. Brienne promised the captain the cooperation of the Kingsguard in flushing out the rest of the gang. The group rode back to the Red Keep as midnight approached. Brienne felt exhaustion tugging at her, but also a grim satisfaction that they had at least cut off part of the threat. However, the existence of a ringleader named Karen who wanted to expand criminal influence in the city was concerning. She knew this would not be the last time she ventured into Flea Bottom. In the days that followed, Brienne coordinated with the City Watch to systematically root out the Black Fists. She personally led nighttime patrols, sometimes accompanied by Podrick or other knights, pushing deeper into the slums than the Watch usually dared. She encountered families huddled in squalor, orphans living off scraps, and merchants who had to pay bribes just to keep their stalls open. Every time, she felt her sense of justice flare. This was the realm she was sworn to protect. Not just the polished halls of the Red Keep, but these dirty streets where common folk struggled to survive. If she could make a difference here, perhaps she was truly worthy of the Kingsguard cloak. Word began to spread that the new Lord Commander was not like others who stayed safe behind the castle gates. Her imposing figure, face set in determined lines, white cloak draped over broad shoulders, became a symbol that some in Flea Bottom began to trust. Children would peek from doorways, pointing at the tall lady knight. Some even gave timid smiles of gratitude. Her presence deterred criminals, though Karen himself remained elusive. She shared all these developments with King Bran and Tyrion. Tyrion was mildly surprised that a low-level gang could cause such trouble, but he gave Brienne the resources she requested. King Bran listened quietly, occasionally sharing insights gleaned from his uncanny perception. He once said, "Be careful, Brienne. Danger can come from unexpected quarters." She noted the caution in his voice, though it did not dissuade her from her mission. Finally, a tip from an underworld informant led Brienne and her knights to the docks one foggy evening. The moon was obscured by clouds, and the brackish smell of the Blackwater Bay clung to the air. They advanced on a warehouse said to be a meeting place for the Black Fists, possibly where Karen was holed up. The plan was simple. The City Watch would block off the streets, while Brienne's group went in first. They forced open the warehouse doors and rushed in, torches raised. At first, the place seemed empty. Crates stacked high, the sound of water lapping against pilings beneath the floor. Then a volley of crossbow bolts whizzed by, clattering off crates and metal armor. Brienne threw up her shield just in time to deflect one. "Shields up!" she cried to her knights. They took cover behind barrels and pillars. From a balcony overhead, shadowy figures fired more bolts. She recognized that they were well-positioned with a defensive advantage. There might be more men hidden among the crates, ready to ambush. She gestured for Ser Marek and Podrick to circle around while Alysanda and Illifer laid down covering fire with their own crossbows. Soon, the fray intensified. Men in black masks emerged from behind crates, wielding short swords and daggers. The clang of steel echoed through the warehouse. Brienne faced two attackers at once, her sword flashing in tight arcs. One lunged low, aiming for her legs, but she stepped aside, bringing Oathkeeper down in a swift, precise strike that disarmed him. Another came from behind, but Podrick blocked his blade with a loud ring of steel, giving Brienne time to pivot and deliver a blow that knocked the attacker unconscious. She could hear Ser Alysanda's fierce cry, see Illifer's measured precision. Ser Marek was dueling a tall thug with a heavy mace. The gold cloaks poured in from the side doors, adding to the confusion. Shadows leaped and shrank in the torchlight, and the entire warehouse smelled of sweat, fear, and brine. "Find Karen," Brienne shouted, pushing forward. She advanced up a flight of wooden stairs to the balcony, shield high against more crossbow fire. Her broad shoulders allowed her to batter aside an assailant who tried to block her path. Storming along the narrow walkway, she spotted a man who stood out, tall, broad-chested, with a ragged beard and a black bandana around his forehead, barking orders. He lifted a heavy axe and glared at her with feral eyes. "Come on then," he roared. "I'll kill you like I killed that watchman." Brienne wasted no time. She closed the distance, blocking his first swing with her shield. The force of his blow rattled her arm, but she gritted her teeth and countered with a thrust of Oathkeeper. He barely managed to dodge, but she nicked his side. Karen cursed and swung again, aiming at her helm. She ducked, letting the axe bite into the wooden railing, and slammed her shoulder into him. The impact knocked him off balance, and he staggered back, nearly toppling over the railing. They exchanged a flurry of blows, each parrying or dodging in a deadly dance. Karen was strong, surprisingly agile for his size, but he lacked the discipline and technique of a true knight. Brienne recognized openings, seizing on his wild swings. A slash from Oathkeeper caught his arm, drawing blood. He hissed, but lunged again, desperation fueling his attack. Brienne sidestepped, pivoted, and brought her sword around in a powerful arc that slammed into his axe, sending it flying from his grasp. A moment later, she crashed her shield into his chest. He tried to keep his footing, but the momentum toppled him over the railing. With a strangled cry, Karen fell off the balcony and landed heavily on a crate below, which shattered under his weight. Panting, Brienne hurried down the stairs. She found Karen groaning, clutching his side. Several gold cloaks rushed to seize him, binding his wrists. The rest of the criminals lay subdued or dead. One of the gold cloaks checked Karen's injuries, then nodded up at Brienne. "He'll live," the watchman said, "long enough for the noose." Brienne looked down at Karen, who glared back with hate-filled eyes. "You think you've won?" he spat. "This city is rotten. Another gang will rise in my place." She gazed at him coldly. "Then we'll stop them too." With Karen's capture, the Black Fists collapsed. The city breathed a little easier, and rumors spread quickly that the new Lord Commander had personally broken the gang's back. Some called her Brienne the Defender, others the Tall Lady, or simply the Oathkeeper. She paid no mind to such monikers, but she heard them whispered in the streets. People felt safer. That, she thought, was the best reward for her efforts. As the city settled, Brienne returned to the Red Keep late one evening. She removed her helm in the courtyard and handed it to a waiting squire. The moonlight bathed the towers in silver. She began to climb the steps to her chambers, exhaustion tugging at her every step. But she was halted by a familiar voice behind her. "My Lord Commander." She turned to see Jaime Lannister's face in her mind's eye, but it was only the memory that the voice conjured. In truth, it was Tyrion, his head tilted up at her. He wore a thoughtful expression. "The city thanks you, Brienne. I thought you might like to know that Bran is pleased. Justice was done swiftly. And it seems some lords are warming to the idea of a woman leading the Kingsguard. A few have praised your no-nonsense approach. You have more support now than when you first took the post." Brienne inclined her head, her voice low. "I don't seek their approval, Tyrion, but if it helps keep the peace, so be it." Tyrion smiled wryly. "Indeed. I only came to say that you should get some rest. Tomorrow, there's an audience with a delegation from the Iron Islands, and it might be unpleasant. Lord Dalton Greyjoy's heir remains vocal about their independence." She exhaled softly. "I'll be there, of course." As Tyrion turned to go, he paused. "Brienne, you're doing good here. More than just protecting the king, you're protecting the people. I know Jaime would have been proud." The mention of Jaime's name caught her off guard, and she struggled to keep her composure. She did not like to let others see how deeply that loss still affected her. "Thank you, Tyrion," she said, her tone more delicate than usual. "I hope so." He gave a sympathetic nod, then disappeared into the shadows, leaving Brienne to her thoughts. As she climbed the steps once more, she considered all that had happened since she arrived in King's Landing, the ceremony where she was named Lord Commander, the tireless effort to rebuild the Kingsguard, the nights spent pursuing criminals in Flea Bottom. In so many ways, her life had been a series of impossible obstacles, and yet, here she stood, forging her path, shaped by duty and guided by honor. In the weeks that followed, the realm faced one minor crisis after another, yet the city remained relatively calm. An attempted smuggling ring in the narrow sea was broken by the royal fleet. A small riot in the western wards was pacified with minimal bloodshed. Brienne continued her relentless routine, patrolling, training, advising, and ensuring the king's safety in every public appearance. She found time to pen updates in the White Book, adding the new Knights of the Kingsguard, detailing Karen's capture, and summarizing the day-to-day events that shaped her tenure. The lines filled with a sense of purpose. Yet even as she worked, part of her ached for the open roads, the starry skies of the Riverlands, and the simpler quest of searching for Sansa and Arya. She remembered a time when her only dream was to serve a just king or queen, to protect the innocent, and to fulfill her oath to Catelyn Stark. Now she had done all that and more. The realm had changed, but so had she. She sometimes wondered what her father would say if he saw her now, not just a knight, but Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. She hoped he would be proud, that Tarth would hold her in good esteem. One day, as she supervised a royal procession, an envoy from Tarth appeared at the Red Keep. She recognized the banner, a sunburst on a rose-colored field. It was a small party led by a cousin of hers. They bowed deeply to the king, then approached Brienne with respect, addressing her by her new title. They brought greetings from her father, Lord Selwyn, who had heard of her accomplishments and wished to reaffirm Tarth's loyalty to the crown. Brienne felt a swelling in her heart when they told her that Lord Selwyn was well, that he spoke often of his daughter with pride. She had not seen him in a long time, and she yearned to ride across the sea to Tarth to visit. But for now her duty remained in King's Landing. She thanked the envoys for the news, gave them her regards, and arranged for them to have comfortable lodgings. Amid all these responsibilities, Brienne found occasional moments of stillness. Late in the evenings, when most of the court slept, she walked the ramparts, gazing out at the city's sea of flickering lights. She thought of old battles, of the nights she spent guarding Jaime during their travels, how she once despised him for his arrogance, only to learn the depth of his hidden humanity. She also thought of Renly Baratheon, the man she had adored, who had believed in her enough to name her part of his Rainbow Guard. She remembered Catelyn Stark, who had offered her understanding and trust in a cruel world. And she recalled the vow she made upon receiving Oathkeeper, to protect Sansa, to defend the Stark girls, to fulfill her promise. So much had changed. They were no longer girls in need of rescue, they were powerful women in their own right. Yet Brienne's vow was never just about them. It was about the principle of protection, the duty of a knight, and the idea that the strong must shield the weak. Her steps carried her around the perimeter of the Red Keep's upper walls, and she paused at a vantage point overlooking Blackwater Bay. The moon's reflection shimmered on the dark water. The ghosts of the past felt close, but instead of haunting her, they guided her, reminding her of the ideals she fought for. In time, other challenges came. An uprising in the Vale that required the king's attention, a brief confrontation with a band of outlaws near Riverrun, rumors of tension in the west. Through it all, King Bran relied on Brienne and her Kingsguard to maintain order, and they did so with distinction. Brienne became a symbol of a new kind of leadership, one that valued both strength and compassion, unafraid to wield the sword when necessary but always striving to use it to defend rather than dominate. Lords visiting from across the realm began to acknowledge her presence in the court with more genuine respect. Even lords who once doubted a woman's capacity to lead the Kingsguard found themselves stymied by her record of success. Tales spread. How she personally subdued notorious criminals, how she maintained the highest discipline among her knights, how she carried a sword of Valyrian steel once gifted by a Lannister. These stories turned into a sort of living legend, though Brienne herself had little interest in fame. She cared only for the realm's well-being, and each day she prayed she would be worthy of her station. The king, for his part, continued to rule with a calm aloofness that sometimes unsettled the court but generally produced fair decisions. Tyrion deftly handled the intricate negotiations and alliances, while Brienne and her knights ensured no harm came to Bran. Together, they formed a triad of leadership that held the fragile peace in place. Time moved on, and Brienne found moments of happiness in small things. The camaraderie of her fellow Kingsguard, the sincerity in Podrick's growth from squire to knight, the gratitude of a merchant she saved from extortion. She had nights when sleep came easily, but also nights when she woke from dreams of a golden-haired knight praising her skill, or a shadow with a rainbow swirling behind it, only for it to vanish when she reached out. She told no one of these dreams. She bore them quietly, letting them serve as her private reminders of why she fought. On a quiet autumn morning, she stood in the training yard, reflecting on how the crisp air reminded her of the north. Sansa had returned to Winterfell, but word arrived that she planned a visit soon, along with Arya, who had not been seen in King's Landing for many moons. Brienne felt a stir of eagerness. She had grown fond of the Stark sisters in different ways, and she relished the chance to see them both safe and well. Perhaps Arya had more tales of distant lands, and Sansa more news of the North's prosperity. She brushed a strand of her short hair away from her face, gazing at the morning sky. The horizon glowed pale gold, promising another day of duties and decisions. Another day to uphold the vows she had taken. And beneath that sky, with Oathkeeper at her side, Brienne silently reaffirmed the oath that had carried her through battles and heartbreaks and triumphs, to protect, to serve, to stand for honor in a land too often devoid of it. Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, a title she never expected, a burden she had never imagined. Yet it fit her like the well-forged steel she wore, molded to her shape by experience and tempered by her unwavering heart. The realm had found in her a protector it sorely needed, and she, in turn, had found her place at last. She knew there would be more hardships to come, more blood to spill, more injustices to face. But as long as she drew breath, she would stand against them, the white cloak fluttering behind her, a beacon of hope to the common folk who once cowered in terror. So the story continued, day by day, with Brienne of Tarth at the helm of the Kingsguard, shaping not only the future of King's Landing but the very ideal of what knighthood could be in the aftermath of war. Hers was a legacy of dedication, courage, and compassion, words that might one day fill the white book with pages of deeds done not for glory but for the love of honor itself. If the gods were just, they would let her stand as a testament that even in the darkest of times, a true knight could shine like a single bright star, guiding the realm toward a fairer dawn. And thus, in the hush of sunrise, Brienne lifted her sword in a silent salute to all she had lost and all she had sworn to protect, ready to face whatever the next chapter would bring. Brienne woke early the next morning, pulling herself from the warmth of her bedroll in the Kingsguard Tower. She dressed with habitual efficiency, piece by piece, the padded gambeson first, tightening its straps, the gleaming breastplate next, buckled across her torso, bracers and greaves fitted over forearms and shins, and finally the white cloak pinned at her shoulder. The symbolic garment that marked her as Lord Commander. She felt its weight, not just the physical heft of cloth but the gravity of the vow it represented. Rising to her full height, she glanced into the small polished mirror in her chamber. Her own reflection gazed back, pale eyes, the new lines of responsibility framing them, short-cropped hair brushing her ears. Then she turned away and left her rooms to greet the day's demands, stepping out into corridors already alive with servants and guards. She moved through the Red Keep with a sure stride. Podrick was waiting outside her door as he often did, indeed it had grown second nature to him. He snapped to attention when she stepped into the hallway, a small smile tugging the corner of his lips. She returned the faintest of nods. "Ser Podrick," she said quietly, acknowledging him not only as her one-time squire but now a fellow knight, one of her sworn brothers in the Kingsguard. It had taken him time to grow into the role, but there was no question of his loyalty or courage. Together, they headed for the courtyard. The sun was just cresting the rooftops, illuminating the stone walls in golden light. The day's business would soon begin. Petitioners, small councils, training sessions, maybe more letters from all corners of the realm. The Iron Islands delegation still lurked in King's Landing, along with other envoys who sought the king's ear. As Lord Commander, Brienne would need to stand guard during audiences or accompany King Bran whenever he ventured beyond the castle walls. But first, she wanted to check on the morning drills. One of her self-imposed duties was training the new recruits who hoped, one day, to join the City Watch or serve as sworn swords for the crown. Most would never come close to the Kingsguard, but it was her belief that a well-trained, disciplined City Watch could do more than simply keep the peace. It could protect the small folk from suffering the casual cruelties that old kings had often allowed. She had begun a rotation of volunteer lessons, open to anyone in service to the crown who wished to improve their skills. In the courtyard, several young men and women arrayed themselves in neat lines, wooden training swords in hand. Among them were half a dozen prospective recruits for the City Watch and a handful of other soldiers from noble houses, each hoping to earn greater favor in the capital. Ser Alessandro Royce, the tall, quick-witted knight from the Vale who had joined the Kingsguard a few months prior, was already there calling out drills. When she spotted Brienne, she saluted crisply. "Lord Commander," she called. Brienne returned the salute with a nod, stepping forward. Her presence seemed to steal the posture of every trainee. "Continue," Brienne said in her low, carrying voice. She planted her hands on her hips and watched as they ran through a series of defensive stances. High guard, middle guard, shield lifts, stepping arcs. Alessandra corrected them, walking down the line with an eagle-eyed focus. Brienne's gaze swept over the novices, and she felt a twinge of guarded optimism. Years ago, she had been laughed at for her interest in swordsmanship, derided as a woman trying to play the part of a man. Now, here in the capital, she saw men and women alike standing in a row, practicing under her watch, and no one dared mock them for their presence, at least not openly. It was a slow shift, but progress nonetheless, one life at a time. After a while, she joined Alessandra, quietly discussing the trainee's progress. Alessandra pointed out a young man from the Stormlands, strong but overly reliant on raw power. "He's got a heavy swing," Alessandra said. "He can break a shield in half if he lands a blow, but half the time he leaves himself wide open." Brienne nodded. "He needs footwork drills, smaller arcs. Tell him to watch me this afternoon when I practice. Speed and control matter just as much as strength." Alessandra agreed. "And the young woman from the north, Elise, I think is her name. She's quite agile. Quick learner too." "She might be watch material," Brienne said. "Keep an eye on her. With the right mentorship, she could prove valuable." They continued speaking quietly until the final sequences were done. Then Brienne stepped forward, motioning for the group to gather. "Well done," she said simply, her voice calm but firm. "You may think yourselves ready to fight, but remember, victory is not just about how hard you can swing a blade. It's about discipline, thinking under pressure, and knowing how to protect your flank. Above all, if you are sworn to the crown, your duty is to protect the weak and uphold justice, not to revel in bloodshed. Don't ever forget that." They nodded, some looking awed or inspired, others simply tired. The morning session concluded, and the trainees dispersed. Alessandra offered Brienne a respectful bow, which Brienne returned with a gentler inclination of her head. "I'll see you later, Sir Alessandra. After the midday meal, we'll review more advanced drills." Alessandra departed, leaving Brienne with Podrick. He watched her with a somewhat admiring smile. "They do respect you, my lady, Lord Commander," he said, catching himself. Though Brienne had always insisted he could speak to her in a less formal manner when in private, Podrick maintained that old habit of courtesy. She looked at him, thinking how proud she was of his progress. "It's not about me," she said quietly. "It's about the realm, about creating a better future for those who have only known strife." He nodded. "Yes, but you do inspire them. We can't deny that." She allowed herself the smallest curl of the lip that might pass for a smile. "Come, Podrick. We should attend to the king's schedule. The Ironborn will have demands, and I expect them to be as stubborn as the sea." They made the our way to the royal apartments, traveling a winding route through a corridor draped in crimson banners. Outside the double doors stood two of the gold cloaks who saluted as Brienne and Podrick approached. Inside, King Bran was conferring with Tyrion and a few of the lords on the small council. The king's expression was as inscrutable as ever, his eyes distant as though looking beyond the walls of the present. Bran's watchers parted to allow Brienne and Podrick in. Tyrion glanced over, gave a slight nod, and then resumed talking. "We understand your position, Lord Harold," Tyrion was saying to a lanky man with thinning hair. "But the Ares' defiance was quashed, and we must ensure that no pockets of loyalists to the old ways remain. The new lords recognized by King Bran have already sworn fealty. We can't have them undermined by holdouts." Lord Harold Royce, not to be confused with Sir Alessandra's family line, pursed his lips. "I speak only to caution the king that certain mountain clans are slow to accept changes. They might harbor trouble." "We will be vigilant," Tyrion replied, measured. "But time and fair leadership should win them over, or at least keep them from rebellion." Bran's voice, calm but penetrating, intervened. "They have lost much in the recent wars. We will not provoke them further by sending an entire army, but we can station a small garrison to keep the peace. Lord Harold, see to it that your men coordinate with our envoys. We aim for harmony, not subjugation." Lord Harold bowed stiffly and with that was dismissed. He withdrew, leaving only the king, Tyrion, Ser Davos Seaworth, who now served as master of ships and a messenger from the Reach. Davos wore a patient expression as though used to the intricacies of court talk by now, but he spared Brienne a friendly wave of greeting. The messenger, a young man with a scroll tucked under his arm, stood to the side, waiting for the conversation to conclude. Bran turned his attention to Brienne. "Lord Commander, I trust the city is secure this morning?" She inclined her head. "Yes, Your Grace. The nightly patrols in Flea Bottom remain vigilant, and we've had no further trouble from the remnants of the Blackfists or similar gangs. The city watch is performing well." Bran nodded, that distant calm in his gaze. "Good. We may need your presence for the Iron Islands delegation shortly. They've requested an audience regarding trade concessions and fishing rights near the coast of the Westerlands. It seems they feel the need to push for greater autonomy." Tyrion chimed in. "Lord Meryn Blacktide has been particularly vocal. The Ironborn are never easy negotiators. We might do well to keep a strong presence on our side of the table." Brienne understood the subtext. Her presence was partly symbolic, a reminder that the crown was not to be trifled with. Although she disliked playing the role of intimidation, she acknowledged it had its uses. "I'll be there, Your Grace." The king nodded once, seemingly satisfied. Then he turned to Davos. "Master of ships, you'll join us as well. We must ensure any agreements about naval boundaries are precise, and we'll want your expertise." Davos bowed. "Aye, Your Grace. As you wish." Bran looked tired, his posture slightly slumped. Sometimes, even though his mind was sharp, the demands of rule weighed on his frame. Brienne wondered if he ever missed the simplicity of Winterfell, but she knew better than to ask such a question. Instead, she simply prepared herself to stand guard through another lengthy session of politics. After a midday meal, during which Brienne took only a few bites of bread and cheese, her mind too occupied with upcoming responsibilities, she and Podrick proceeded to the throne room. There, in the great hall, the king would hear the Ironborn delegates. Torches burned in brackets along the walls, casting dancing shadows across the polished floor. The Iron Throne, still a reforged symbol of unity rather than the cruel cluster of swords from the past, rose on its dais at the far end. Bran, assisted by a pair of servants, settled onto it. Tyrion took his usual seat by the hands table. Davos and a few other counselors stood nearby. Brienne positioned herself at Bran's right, a silent sentinel in white armor, while Ser Balon Swan took the opposite side. Podrick and Alysanne lingered in the background, ready to step in if needed. A herald announced the Iron Islands representatives, Lord Meryn Blacktide, Lady Asha's cousin or nephew sometimes removed. The genealogies of the Ironborn could be perplexing, and two other Ironborn captains who flanked him. They strode forward with the easy arrogance common to many Ironborn, broad-shouldered and clad in dark leathers. Lord Meryn's hair was salt-streaked, his beard braided in a manner reminiscent of seafaring warriors. He did not bend the knee. Ironborn rarely did so willingly, but he offered a terse bow of his head. Bran did not compel them to kneel, he rarely forced such displays. "Your Grace," Meryn said, voice echoing in the hall. "I come bearing requests from my people. We wish to clarify the boundaries of our fishing rights along the coast nearest Lannisport and to ensure no further taxes are levied on Ironborn vessels trading in the Westerlands." Tyrion, who hailed from the Westerlands, set aside a sheaf of parchment. "Lord Blacktide, the arrangement was made under Queen Daenerys Targaryen and reaffirmed under King Bran. The Ironborn were granted certain privileges in exchange for keeping the peace and not raiding the western shores. That does not mean unlimited fishing or free docking. The lords of the Westerlands rely on those taxes to maintain the ports." Meryn's lips pressed into a thin line. "We are not raiders anymore. My people seek a living, just as yours do. But too many fees are imposed on our vessels. I suspect it's the Lannister name clinging to old grudges. Let us fish closer to the coast and reduce the docking taxes. Otherwise, you risk turning honest sailors back to the old ways." A hush descended. It was a veiled threat, or at least an unsubtle warning, that the Ironborn might revert to pillage if the terms were not agreeable. Brienne's jaw tightened as she contemplated how many years the Seven Kingdoms had been racked by wars, how many had died, and how fragile the peace still was. Bran's voice was quiet, but it carried authority. "Lord Blacktide, you speak of honest sailors, yet you bring the specter of raiding into our conversation. Are you saying the Ironborn cannot be trusted to honor their word unless we grant them everything they demand?" Meryn hesitated, aware that pressing too far could jeopardize everything. "We have not taken up arms since your reign began, Your Grace," he said more carefully. "But we are proud. We do not bend easily to restrictive laws. If the realm wishes to remain at peace, We merely ask for fair compromise. Tyrion leaned forward, steepling his fingers. What do you consider fair? Meryn gestured to one of his companions, who produced a rolled parchment from a leather satchel. He passed it to Tyrion via a waiting attendant. Tyrion unrolled it, scanning the lines. Davos peered over his shoulder. Together they frowned and exchanged a glance. You ask for extended fishing boundaries, have docking taxes in 3 major ports, and fewer crown inspectors on your cargo shipments, Tyrion summarized. You realize that's quite generous, if not excessive. Meryn shrugged. The seas belong to no one. We have as much right to fish them as any Westerlord. Tyrion pressed his lips together, his sharp mind calculating. If we reduce taxes and allow you to fish closer to the shore, will you agree to an increased tribute to the crown, or to providing ships for the Royal Navy when called upon? Meryn's eyes narrowed. We might, provided you do not demand all our best ships or treat us as a vassal navy. We govern ourselves. Brienne listened, silent and watchful, as the negotiations continued. She did not relish these sorts of barter deals, but it was her duty to remain ready. She caught the subtle tension in Meryn's stance and the flick of his companion's hand near a dagger's hilt. It was probably a habit more than an immediate threat, but she made certain he noticed her stare, and his hand moved away. Bran asked quiet, incisive questions. Tyrion offered counterterms. Davos spoke about shipping routes and how the Ironborn might prove an asset if they agreed to help patrol the seas against pirates who had begun harassing trade from Old Town to King's Landing. At length, a tentative agreement began to form. The Ironborn would gain some relief from taxes, though not as much as they demanded, in exchange for more explicit commitments to the Crown's navy when needed. Additionally, a joint maritime council, composed of Ironborn and Westerlanders, would regulate fishing zones to prevent overharvesting. Finally, Bran looked at Meryn. Will you accept these terms? Meryn conferred briefly with his companions, then nodded. We will. For now. But we want it understood that if the Westerlands attempt to strong-arm us, we will remember. Brienne's hand instinctively tightened around the grip of Oathkeeper. She disliked his tone, but said nothing. The king merely inclined his head. Peace is kept through mutual respect, Brent said. Prove you can abide by the terms, and so will we. You have my word. With that, the negotiations ended. The Ironborn retreated, leaving behind a swirl of tension in the Great Hall. Tyrion and Davos both let out weary sighs. At least no swords were drawn, Tyrion muttered. These days, that counts as a success. Bran signaled for Tyrion to work out the final details on parchment to be signed by both parties. Then the king rose, glancing at Brienne. Walk with me, Lord Commander. Brienne accompanied him into a quieter side corridor, followed at a respectful distance by Podrick and Balon Swan, who remained discreetly out of earshot. Bran guided his wheeled chair with smooth motions. He had become quite adept at moving through the castle's corridors and ramps. The stone walls were hung with tapestries of past kings, some scorched at the edges from the war, though carefully preserved. When they were sufficiently away from prying ears, Bran spoke in his soft voice. I can see many paths, many possibilities. Yet the Ironborn remain difficult to chart. The sea is in their blood. Brienne nodded. They have never fully integrated with the rest of the realm, but if they maintain peace, that may be enough for now. Bran's dark eyes flickered. You sense, as I do, that they may still cause trouble. She inhaled slowly, deciding how to phrase her response. I've learned that so long as people hold grudges and old loyalties to bygone ways, there will always be those who chafe at the new order. The Iron Islands, the North, even parts of the Reach, everyone has scars from the wars. All we can do is stand ready to defend those who cannot defend themselves. That is our duty. He studied her with that curious, measured look as though peering into her very thoughts. You do more than that, Brienne. You show people that integrity is possible. It's a rare thing, a precious thing. Her cheeks colored faintly, but she merely bowed her head in acknowledgement. She still wasn't entirely used to the king's gentle praise. Thank you, your grace. I only do what any true knight should. He smiled a little, though there was still something distant in his eyes, that uncanny sense of a boy who had become more than human. I know, Bran said quietly, then changed the subject. My sister Sansa will be visiting soon. She's traveling with a contingent from the north to discuss trade in grain and steel. I would have you attend to her security needs while she's in the city. Brienne's expression softened. Of course, your grace. I am hers to command as always. I look forward to seeing her again. Bran gave a small nod, a glimmer of warmth at the mention of his sister. Then he turned his wheeled chair and signaled that he wished to return to his chambers to speak with Tyrion about finalizing the Ironborn terms. Brienne escorted him, ensuring that any who approached did so respectfully, her presence alone enough to deter idle chatter. When the day's official business ended, she found herself outside in the courtyard once more, the sun dipping toward late afternoon. Ser Alessandro was there, running a group of older arms men through advanced techniques. As Brienne passed, she observed their form with a critical eye, offering a suggestion now and then. The ring of steel on steel echoed across the yard. Then she headed to the armory where she removed her breastplate to check for loose straps. The metal gleamed, but it had endured a few scuffs, a silent testament to her constant activity. She had it attended to by a blacksmith's apprentice who polished out the worst of the marks. She waited patiently, hearing the clang of hammers and the roar of the forge. The heat from the coals licked at her cheeks, a reminder of all the countless swords that had been forged or broken in the wars that preceded this tenuous peace. With her armor freshened and resecured, Brienne returned to the White Tower where the Kingsguard had their quarters. It remained half-emptied of old records and relics that had been lost or destroyed in the conflict. Yet the White Book was intact, perched on its lectern under watchful guard. She stepped toward it as she often did in quieter moments and ran her gauntlet hand over the cover, recalling how she once wrote Jaime Lannister's final deeds within its pages, how she had written her own. Now she could record the new developments that marked her ongoing service. She opened to the page that bore her name. There was more space to fill. These pages were living histories, not mere eulogies. She carefully took up a quill, dipped it in ink, and noted the recent events, the expulsion of the Black Fists from Flea Bottom, the negotiations with the Iron Islands, the addition of new knights to the Kingsguard. She penned it all with measured wording, no embellishment, no flattery. Her script remained functional rather than ornate, a reflection of her practicality. When she finished, the daylight had begun its slow descent toward evening. She left the White Book behind and ascended the steps to her private chamber. Removing her armor piece by piece, she finally let herself breathe, every muscle in her body aware of the weariness that accumulated over so many days. She thought of writing a letter to her father on Tarth, but she felt too tired to formulate the words. Perhaps tomorrow. Instead, she allowed herself a simple supper of stew and bread brought by one of the castle servants. As she ate, she reflected on the swirl of responsibilities that surrounded her daily. This was no longer the life of a wandering knight, traveling roads in search of a lost girl or an absent lord. This was the heart of governance, where each day demanded vigilance and wisdom and each victory felt tenuous at best. Yet she was proud that she could serve the king in this way, and proud that she, in her own quiet manner, had managed to shape the Kingsguard into something that, if not perfect, at least strove for real honor. By the time she finished, darkness had settled outside her window. She rose, placing a hand on Oathkeeper's hilt. The Valyrian steel sword was never far from her, and she kept it sheathed at her bedside. The memory of Jaime Lannister's face flickered in her mind, his sardonic smile, the surprising gentleness in his voice when he'd spoken of duty. She drew in a slow breath, letting her thoughts settle. The day was done, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. She lay down on the modest bed, allowing her body to sink into its thin mattress. Despite her swirling thoughts, exhaustion soon claimed her, and she slipped into a dreamless sleep. The next few days passed swiftly. Sansa Stark's entourage arrived earlier than expected, sending a buzz of activity through the Red Keep. Lords and ladies of the north, draped in thick cloaks and wearing the sigil of the dire wolf, swept into the city with banners held high. The small folk who rarely saw the Lady of Winterfell lined the streets out of curiosity or admiration. Brienne, as Lord Commander, rode out with a contingent of gold cloaks to greet them at the city gates and escort them to the castle. It was late afternoon when Sansa entered King's Landing, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her posture as regal as any queen. She wore a gown of muted gray embroidered with dire wolves at the sleeves, a testament to the North's colors. Beside her rode a few notable companions, Lord Glover, Lady Mormont, an older cousin of the late, fiery Lyanna Mormont, and others Brienne recognized from her time in Winterfell. At the front, an advance guard of northern soldiers kept watch for any threat, though there was no sign of hostility. As they passed through the gates, the crowd offered subdued cheers. Sansa turned and saw Brienne, her eyes lighting with warmth. When the procession halted, she gracefully dismounted, and Brienne did likewise. They met in the space between the retinues, Brienne bowing in formal greeting. "My lady," she said, though the words carried an undertone of personal reverence. Sansa stepped forward, taking Brienne's hands and smiling. "Lord Commander," she replied, with a hint of playfulness at the title, "you are a sight for sore eyes." I've heard rumors of all your accomplishments, though they hardly do you justice. Brienne bowed her head, feeling a small flush of pride. It's an honor to welcome you, Lady Sansa. Thank you, Sansa said, her gaze drifting to the city around them. So much has changed since I was last here. The rubble is gone. New houses are being built, and the people don't seem as fearful. Brienne nodded. We've worked hard to maintain order. King Bran's approach has been kinder, and the small folk seem to appreciate it. Though there's always more to be done. Sansa seemed to consider that. Well, I look forward to speaking with my brother and seeing what new measures can be taken. It is good to see King's Landing trying to heal. They exchanged a fond smile. Then Sansa's retinue moved on, heading toward the Red Keep under the watchful eyes of the gold cloaks. Brienne fell in step beside her, mindful of her guard duties. She noticed that Sansa seemed more confident than ever, moving with surety and grace. There was no sign of the frightened girl who had once been at Joffrey's mercy. The trials she endured had shaped her into a formidable leader in her own right. In the great hall, Bran waited on his throne, flanked by Tyrion, Davos, and a few others. Sansa entered and approached, inclining her head respectfully, though there was a gentle humor in her gaze as she looked upon her younger brother. Bran nodded in return, a small smile touching his lips. They spoke briefly for the benefit of the assembled court, an official greeting more ceremonial than intimate. Then the courtiers parted to allow the siblings a private conversation. Brienne, as part of the Kingsguard, remained close enough to be of service but far enough to not intrude. That evening, a feast was held in the Queen's ballroom, a space repaired after the devastating wars. The table was laden with roasted meats, fresh bread, and autumn vegetables from the Reach, along with northern staples like hearty stews and strong ale. Nobles from the north mingled with lords of the Crownlands and beyond. Brienne stood at the periphery watchful, her posture at ease yet alert. She was not fond of feasts, she never had been, but recognized their folly. To call utility. As the music played and cups clinked, alliances were forged or reinforced, old grudges carefully set aside or masked by forced laughter. Sansa held her own amidst southern courtiers who tried to charm her. She smiled demurely, responded politely, yet kept her northern dignity. Tyrion moved through the crowd with a glass in his hand, trading banter with those who approached. Brienne sometimes caught glimpses of Podrick, who stood near a door, ensuring no one entered uninvited. Ser Alisanda was posted near another entrance, scanning the throng. Amid the swirl of conversation, Sansa eventually found her way to Brienne. She took a moment to stand beside the Lord Commander, exhaling a small breath as though glad to step out of the fray. You haven't tasted the wine, have you, Brienne? She asked with a wry smile. Brienne shook her head. Not while on duty, my lady. Sansa nodded, glancing at the crowd. I suppose your duty never ends. Still, I wanted to speak with you in a quieter space, if you can spare a moment. Brienne gestured to Podrick with a subtle tilt of her head, indicating that he keep watch. Then she accompanied Sansa out of the ballroom down a corridor lined with flickering lanterns. They came upon a small balcony that overlooked one of the castle's inner courtyards. The sound of distant music faded to a muffled hum. Alone on the balcony, Sansa leaned against the stone balustrade, gazing at the stars. A gentle breeze ruffled her auburn hair. Brienne stood a respectful step behind, still in protective mode. Finally, Sansa turned, her voice quieter, warmer. It's so strange, Brienne. I remember the city as a place of nightmares where Joffrey tormented me and I felt trapped like a bird in a cage. And now I return to find something else. Something more hopeful. Brienne's stern features softened. A lot has changed. Thanks to King Bran and also thanks to the sacrifices so many made. Sansa nodded, her eyes reflecting memories of those who had perished in the wars. Yes, so many sacrifices. Sometimes it feels like we're living in a borrowed peace, but I'll take it over the alternative. And how have you been, truly? I see you standing tall in your white cloak, commanding men and women alike, forging a new Kingsguard. It makes me proud to see how far you've come. Brienne felt a warmth rise in her chest. Thank you, my lady. It wasn't an easy road. But I've been given trust and I do all I can to be worthy of it. The city, the realm, it needs steadfast protectors. Sansa regarded her with fondness. You've always been steadfast, Brienne. I know sometimes you must miss traveling the open roads, being free from courtly intrigue. A faint sigh escaped Brienne's lips. I do, at times. But here is where I'm needed most and so I remain. Sansa stepped closer, placing a hand on Brienne's armored forearm. I'm grateful you stay for all our sakes. I only wish you'll find your own happiness in this arrangement, not just duty. You deserve that. Brienne hesitated and used to such personal sentiments in the midst of everything. She looked away, gathering her words. My happiness lies in fulfilling my vows, she finally said. And in knowing that you, Arya, and the others I swore to protect no longer live in fear. That is enough. Sansa's eyes glistened faintly and she smiled. I understand. Just remember that you're allowed to have your own life, too. She squeezed Brienne's forearm, then released it, turning to gaze at the night sky. They remained there for a few moments of companionable silence before returning to the feast, where the swirl of politics resumed. For the next few days, Sansa and her counselors conferred with Bran and Tyrion on matters of trade routes, the management of border keeps, the transport of grains south before winter. During these discussions, Brienne typically stood guard, her expression unreadable. She kept track of who entered or left the meeting rooms, ensuring no threat slipped through. One afternoon, near the end of Sansa's visit, a raven arrived with troubling news. A band of outlaws in the Riverlands had attacked a northern supply caravan heading to King's Landing. The caravan had been carrying essential goods for the winter. 2 guards were killed and the rest barely escaped. According to the missive, the outlaws called themselves the Sons of the Trident, claiming to fight for the true king of the Riverlands, though no such king existed. They had vanished into the woods along the Red Fork, leaving behind burning wagons and frightened survivors. When Sansa heard this, her eyes hardened. I will not let these criminals hamper trade between the North and the Crownlands, she said. We've worked too hard to establish stable routes. Bran shared her concern. I sense these outlaws might be no more than common brigands using a grand name. Still, if they are large in number, they pose a threat. Tyrion suggested dispatching a detachment of Lannister men or gold cloaks to assist the local lord in hunting them down. But Brienne spoke up in her measured tone. My knights and I can go, your grace. We have knowledge of those lands. I traveled them extensively in the past. If these outlaws threaten trade, they threaten the realm, and as Kingsguard, it is our duty to protect the king's interests wherever they may be endangered. Sansa nodded approvingly. Brienne knows the Riverlands well. If anyone can find these outlaws, it's her. Bran and Tyrion exchanged a look. Tyrion shrugged. I suppose we can spare you for a short expedition, Lord Commander. The city is quiet for the moment, and we still have Ser Balon and Ser Alessandra, not to mention the gold cloaks, to ensure the king's safety here. Bran inclined his head in agreement. Yes, go, Brienne. Take a few of your knights. Root out these brigands and restore safe passage. And so it was decided. Within a day, Brienne had assembled a small but capable party. Ser Podrick, eager as ever, Ser Illifer, the Reach Knight known for his calm precision, and a dozen gold cloaks who volunteered for the mission. Sansa insisted on adding a few of her northern soldiers to watch over the next caravan while it crossed the Riverlands. Brienne did not object, recognizing that local caravans often fared better with a mix of guards so no territory felt overshadowed. Before they departed, Sansa found Brienne in the courtyard where she was inspecting the horses. Thank you for doing this, Sansa said. I know it's your duty, but I appreciate it nonetheless. My people are frightened and this will reassure them. Brienne paused in adjusting her mount's bridle. I'm glad to help. Rest assured, we won't let these outlaws continue their attacks. Sansa's gaze flickered with gratitude and worry. Be careful, though. The Riverlands can be treacherous, as you well know. And if these brigands have local support, they might be more dangerous than typical highwaymen. Brienne nodded. I'll be cautious. We'll see this done. They exchanged a brief embrace, Sansa's arms around Brienne's neck, Brienne's hand on Sansa's back, the metal of her gauntlet glinting in the sunlight. Then Brienne pulled away, mounting her horse. Podrick and the others were already astride. Sansa stood by, watching as they rode out through the gates of King's Landing, heading west along the main roads that led to the Riverlands. Traveling by horse under a clear sky reminded Brienne of earlier days, though now she rode at the head of a company rather than as a solitary wanderer. The men and women who followed her bore the white and gold banners of the crown, and a few carried the direwolf sigil of the North. It was a testament to the alliances forged in recent years, a shared sense of purpose that transcended old boundaries, at least on the surface. The roads leading from the Crownlands into the Riverlands were well-trodden and generally safe, with small villages and inns spaced every few miles. They made decent time, stopping only to rest the horses or shelter from brief rains. Podrick rode close to Brienne, scanning the horizon with keen eyes. Ser Illifer scouted ahead sometimes, returning with news of the path. The gold cloaks and northern soldiers mingled, exchanging stories about battles fought and families left behind. After 3 days on the road, they reached the outskirts of the Riverlands proper. The rolling fields lay before them, dotted with small forests and winding streams. Autumn had begun to gild the leaves in shades of orange and gold, giving the landscape a serene beauty that belied its history of turmoil. Brienne recalled crossing these lands in search of Arya back when chaos gripped the realm. She remembered seeing burned villages, corpses hanging from trees, desperate peasants turned to banditry. Now, in the calm after the storms, the region was rebuilding, but scars remained. They arrived at a modest holdfast belonging to Lord Redwine Rivers, one of the many minor lords sworn to Riverrun. Word had been sent ahead that the king's men would come, so they were received with cautious hospitality. Lord Rivers was not an ancient name but a relatively new cadet branch, rumored to have common blood. He greeted Brienne politely, though with a slight flicker of surprise at seeing a woman commanding the company. "My lord," Brienne said formally, dismounting. "We come at the king's command to investigate the outlaws calling themselves the Sons of the Trident. We heard they attacked a northern supply caravan near your lands." Lord Rivers frowned. We've heard rumors of these troublemakers. They move through the forested hills west of here, near the Red Fork. My own men have tried to track them, but it's as if they melt away among the common folk. No one admits to seeing them. They're ghosts. Ser Illifer spoke up. They must have safe houses or sympathetic villagers. Perhaps old loyalties to some local cause. Rivers grimaced. During the wars, the Riverlands changed hands so many times. Some here might still resent the crown or the northern lords. Others might simply fear these brigands and keep silent. Either way, they are elusive. Brienne nodded. "Will you grant us permission to use your holdfast as a base of operations while we search? We'll provide our own supplies." "Of course, my lady," said Lord Rivers, catching himself and then remembering to address her title properly. "Or, my Lord Commander. Anything you need." She thanked him, ignoring the slip, and she and her company were shown to a small barracks area attached to the holdfast walls. The conditions were rustic but sufficient. Over a simple meal of bread, stew, and ale they discussed their plan. Scouts would range out at first light, speaking with peasants, checking the terrain for any sign of the outlaws. Brienne intended to accompany them, not content to sit idly behind walls. Night fell, and the holdfast settled into a quiet hush. Brienne found a spot near the hearth in the common hall, sleeping lightly in her armor. She had grown accustomed to resting in partial plate when on campaign. It was uncomfortable, but it gave her peace of mind. The wind outside rattled the shutters, and from time to time she heard the low murmur of the watchmen patrolling the walls. Despite the dryness of the Riverlands autumn, she caught the faint scent of damp earth that reminded her of the storms that once ravaged this land. At dawn, she woke and gathered her party. Ser Illifer, Podrick, and a handful of soldiers ventured into the nearby villages, while Brienne led another group along the riverbank. The plan was to converge later and compare findings. If the outlaws were using hidden trails or abandoned farms, they might discover tracks or rumors that pointed the way. Riding along the Red Fork in the soft morning light, Brienne kept an eye on the river. It glimmered, winding across the plains, dotted with clusters of reeds near the banks. The gold cloaks accompanying her were alert, though a few joked lightly about the easy assignment. "Maybe these Sons of the Trident are but a handful of hungry peasants," one said, earning a stern glance from Brienne. She turned to Podrick, who rode just behind her. "Keep your wits. Even a small band of outlaws can be dangerous, especially if they're desperate." Podrick nodded. "Yes, Lord Commander." They pressed on. The morning passed without incident, the only sign of life being fishermen casting nets into the shallows and farmers tending to meager fields. In one small hamlet, they questioned a miller who claimed ignorance. "Haven't seen anyone suspicious," he insisted, eyes darting. "We're just trying to feed ourselves." Brienne studied his body language, sensing either fear or dishonesty, but she couldn't force him to speak if he'd decided to remain silent. She let him be after cautioning him that harboring outlaws would bring the king's wrath. He paled and nodded anxiously. They moved on. Near midday, as the sun climbed high, they reached a stretch of road where the previous caravan attack had occurred. The blackened remnants of a wagon stood off to the side, charred spokes and axles jutting up like bones. Crows scattered as the riders approached, squawking their annoyance. A hush fell over the group as they surveyed the damage, imagining the violence that had taken place there only days before. Brienne dismounted, examining the ground. She noticed tracks, a tangle of footprints, hoof marks, and deep ruts. They must have driven the caravan off the main road, she murmured, pointing to a set of wagon marks that veered into the tall grass. Why did that unless they wanted to loot it in secret? Podrick nodded, scanning the horizon. And these footprints, there are at least a dozen men. Probably more. One of the gold cloaks, a man named Corvin, knelt beside the tracks. Could be they headed northwest, see how they pivot? He pointed, and Brienne saw that the trail vanished into a copse of trees near the riverbend. They decided to follow, though carefully. Moving in single file, they guided their horses off the road and into the grasslands, forging a path toward the copse. The wind stirred the grass around them, carrying the scent of river mud and decaying reeds. It felt eerily quiet. The crows continued to circle overhead as if anticipating more carrion. As they neared the tree line, Brienne signaled for dismount. The forest ahead was dense enough that riding in might prove risky if an ambush awaited. She handed the reins to one of the soldiers and drew Oathkeeper, the Valyrian steel glinting in the midday sun. Podrick and the gold cloaks readied their own weapons. Carefully, they advanced on foot, scanning the underbrush for movement. The world seemed to hold its breath. Brienne felt the tension thrumming through her limbs, this moment before potential combat where every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig could signify danger. She took point, shield raised, Oathkeeper angled low for a swift strike if needed. Podrick flanked her left side, Corvin on her right. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Brienne's instincts roared. Down, she cried, lifting her shield just as an arrow thumped into it, splintering the wood. Several more arrows sliced through the foliage, forcing the group to scatter for cover. One soldier let out a pained cry as a shaft lodged in his shoulder. From deeper within the trees, figures emerged, men clad in patchwork leathers, their faces half concealed by scarves or hoods. They carried bows, spears, and a few swords. Sons of the Trident, one yelled, brandishing a crude banner that depicted 3 wavy lines on a brown field. Brienne recognized it as a bastardized version of the Riverlands sigil. Hold your ground, Brienne shouted, rallying her men. She knocked aside another arrow with her shield and signaled for Corvin and 2 others to flank left, while Podrick and the rest moved right. They needed to flush out the archers and press forward. Steel rang as the outlaws switched to melee weapons, seeing their ambush had been partially foiled. Brienne rushed one of them, a tall man wielding a short sword. He slashed wildly, but she caught the blow on her shield and slammed Oathkeeper into his flank. He stumbled, cursing in pain. She advanced, forced him back, and disarmed him with a twist of her blade. He scrambled away, leaving a smear of blood on the ground. Nearby, Podrick engaged 2 outlaws at once, parrying their strikes with a determined flurry. His skill had grown immensely, and Brienne felt a swell of pride even in the heat of battle. Another gold cloak sank an outlaw to his knees with a spear thrust, only to be rushed from behind by a second attacker. The soldier cried out, pivoting just in time to see Brienne's blade arc downward and block the would-be killer. She kicked the outlaw's legs from beneath him, finishing him with a swift blow. Arrows continued to zip overhead, though fewer in number. Brienne glimpsed a small cluster of archers retreating deeper into the trees. Don't let them slip away, she shouted to Corvin, who nodded and led a few soldiers in pursuit. The fighting was fierce but short. The outlaws, realizing they faced skilled knights and disciplined soldiers, began to break. A few fell, others retreated into the forest, scattering in all directions. Brienne considered giving chase but decided to secure the immediate area first. She knelt beside the wounded soldier with an arrow in his shoulder, carefully inspecting the injury. Podrick crouched as well, offering a strip of cloth to staunch the bleeding. We need to get him back to the horses, Brienne said. Corvin and the others might return soon. If the outlaws regroup, we don't want to be caught off guard. They gathered their injured and made a quick sweep of the immediate vicinity. They found 3 dead outlaws, 1 badly wounded captive, and another who had surrendered with a trembling raise of hands. Brienne questioned the captive. Where is your leader? Is there a camp? He spat blood, eyes flicking nervously. We fight for the rightful rulers of the Trident. We. Brienne cut him off, pressing Oathkeeper's tip to his throat. Spare me your speeches. Answer the question. Where is your camp? Fear glistened in his eyes. Near the old mill by the bend. But they move around. I don't know where they'll go next. She studied him for a moment, assessing whether he might lie. His trembling limbs suggested he was too terrified to fabricate much. She withdrew her blade. Very well. You'll be brought before the Crown's justice in Riverrun or King's Landing. Pray you find mercy. Podrick, keep an eye on him. She left Podrick to bind the captive. Then Corvin's group returned, having chased off or killed the remaining archers, though a few outlaws vanished into the undergrowth. We found a small hide, a stash of stolen goods in a brush hut, Corvin said. They must have fled in a hurry. We took what we could, grain sacks, dried meats, some northern cloth. Brienne nodded grimly. They've been targeting caravans for a while then. Likely this is only one of several caches. We need to find that old mill the prisoner spoke of. But first, let's get our wounded tended to. They secured the area, retrieved their horses, and retreated from the forest's edge to a safer clearing. The soldier with the arrow wound was stable, thanks to quick bandaging, but he needed proper medical care. They set up a temporary camp. 2 gold cloaks rode back to Lord Rivers's holdfast to request a maester. Meanwhile, Brienne organized a scouting party to locate the mill. By dusk, the scouts returned with news. They had found an abandoned structure near a bend in the river, though they saw no sign of OU. Claws, just footprints and ashes of a recent fire. They must have fled once they realized we'd come looking, one scout reported. Either they'll regroup elsewhere or they'll try to slip away entirely. Brienne weighed their options by the campfire, flames dancing on her armor. The men ate a quiet meal of camp rations. She considered returning to Lord Rivers's holdfast for a larger force, but speed might be their advantage. She glanced at Podrick, who warmed his hands by the fire. If we press on now, under the cover of darkness, we might find them before they travel too far. Podrick nodded. I'm with you, my lady, Lord Commander. She turned to Corvin and Ser Illifer. We'll leave half our group to guard the wounded and the prisoners. The rest will come with me to search the nearby area. These outlaws can't have gone far yet. They agreed, and within an hour Brienne led a smaller contingent into the night, guided by moonlight and torches. The path to the old mill was straightforward, though they had to be careful of potential ambush. Their horses picked their way along a narrow trail through the trees, the air cool and thick with the scent of damp leaves. Occasionally an owl hooted, breaking the hush. At last, they arrived at the mill, a squat, weathered building with a partially collapsed roof standing at the edge of the river bend. The water's quiet murmur filled the darkness. Torchlight flickered across the rotten timbers. Brienne dismounted, motioning for the others to spread out. She approached the mill's open doorway, shield raised. The place seemed deserted, but she would not assume so. Carefully, they entered, stepping over broken boards. Inside, the space was dim, lit only by the glow of their torches. Dust mote swirled in the air. They discovered the remains of a makeshift camp, scattered bedrolls, a quenching bucket, some ragged cloaks. They were here recently, Ser Illifer murmured. The ashes in that pit are still warm. Podrick knelt, picking up a scrap of cloth emblazoned with the same crude wave sigil. So they truly fancy themselves the sons of the Trident. Ridiculous. Brienne turned, scanning the corners. They've gone now, but they might have left something useful behind. She gestured for the group to search the building. As they rummaged, prying open crates and sifting through debris, she moved to a side room that looked like an old storage chamber. There, she found a stack of crates, one partially open. Inside were sacks of grain and barrels of salted fish, stolen provisions from the caravans, no doubt. Then she saw something else, a battered trunk with an iron lock. She motioned for Podrick to help pry it open. With a few grunts, they forced the lock. Inside lay a modest trove of items, pieces of jewelry, a few silver goblets, some coins of various mintings, a heavy ledger book with a broken spine. These were presumably stolen from different merchants and caravans. But what caught Brienne's eye was a folded parchment at the bottom. She retrieved it, expecting some worthless scrap. Yet when she opened it, her eyes narrowed. It bore a rough sketch of the riverlands, certain roads marked with crosses as if indicating prospective ambush sites. There was writing, too, in a cramped hand, short references to caravans, timing, and something about the Blackwood route. The letter ended with an ominous line, "When our new patron arrives, the realm will bend." A chill threaded through Brienne's spine. "They have a patron," she muttered. "Someone funding or encouraging their raids." Podrick leaned over her shoulder, frowning. "Any hint who?" She shook her head. "No name. But they're organized enough to coordinate multiple ambushes. This is no random band of hungry peasants." Ser Illifer entered behind them, glancing at the parchment. "I fear this might point to a broader plot, my lady. The Riverlands has seen enough chaos. If some lord or foreign power is behind this, we need to root it out. Brienne folded the parchment, tucking it away. We'll take all of this back to King's Landing or Riverrun. The outlaws must be intercepted before they can strike again. In that moment, a whistle pierced the silent night. Brienne spun, brandishing Oathkeeper just as torches flared outside. A voice echoed from beyond the crumbling wall, "Surround them. Don't let them escape." The Sons of the Trident were not far gone after all. It was an ambush, or perhaps they had doubled back to trap the Crown's knights inside. Brienne cursed under her breath. "Form up," she called to her soldiers. "Defend the entrances." Podrick and Ser Illifer dashed to the front entrance while the gold cloaks fanned out with weapons ready. The outlaws rushed from the darkness, waving that crude banner, brandishing swords and spears. Torchlight glinted on steel. They had the advantage of surprise and numbers. A swirl of chaos erupted as they tried to force their way into the mill. Brienne quickly realized that if they stayed inside, they might be cornered. She turned to Podrick. "We need to break out into the open, fight on ground where we can maneuver." "Agreed," Podrick said. She led the charge, bashing through the rotting doorway. Several outlaws met her with a clash of steel. She blocked a spear thrust, slicing the shaft in two, then parried a sword aimed at her flank. Spinning, she delivered a brutal shield slam to the swordsman, knocking him flat. Around her, the gold cloaks struggled to hold back the tide of enemies, and Ser Illifer engaged two men with swift, precise strikes. Podrick fended off a halberd-wielding outlaw, ducking a wide swing before thrusting his blade into the man's midsection. The outlaw gasped, staggering. Another lunged behind Podrick, but Brienne intercepted, whirling Oathkeeper in a lethal arc that tore through the attacker's leather armor. Sparks flew, shouts filled the air, and the reek of sweat and blood mingled with the musty smell of the old mill. Bit by bit, Brienne's party pushed out, forming a loose defensive circle in the open space beside the building. The river reflected the flickering torchlight, a watery mirror to the violence. More outlaws emerged from the treeline, outnumbering the Crown's forces at least 2-1. "We need to retreat and regroup," Ser Illifer shouted, parrying a blow that nearly took off his head. "We can't hold this spot." Brienne nodded grimly. She could see the outlaws were determined, their eyes lit with fervor. Some even wore crude armor bearing the wave sigil as if it were a coat of arms. "Fall back to the horses," she commanded, motioning for her men to pull away. Moving as a unit, they withdrew. The outlaws surged, attempting to encircle them. Brienne took the rear, blocking thrusts and slashes, her white cloak stained with mud and flecks of blood. She saw Podrick stumbling for a moment when an outlaw kicked him in the thigh, but he steadied himself, returning a strike that downed his foe. One gold cloak fell, a spear lodged in his gut. Brienne fought back a cry of frustration but couldn't reach him in time. Another soldier dragged the wounded man along, trying to save him. They pressed on, forging through the ring of outlaws, each footstep precarious in the uneven ground. Finally, they reached the clearing where the horses were tethered. More outlaws waited there, but fewer in number, likely expecting an easy slaughter. Brienne did not slow, charging them with a fierce yell that sent a shock through her adversaries. She battered one aside with her shield, slashed another across the chest, and secured a path to the horses. The gold cloaks fended off the rest as best they could. "Mount up," Brienne shouted, voice hoarse. Podrick and the others scrambled into their saddles. She swung onto her mare, urging it forward. The outlaws tried to grab reins, to pull knights from saddles, but the Crown's party spurred their horses into a sudden gallop. The thunder of hooves drowned out the shouts as they broke free, riding hard into the night. Breath came ragged in Brienne's chest, adrenaline surging. She glanced back, counting heads in the dim torchlight. They had lost at least one gold cloak, possibly two. She couldn't tell if the second was dead or left behind. Guilt flared in her heart, but she pushed it aside. They had to survive, gather reinforcements, and root out these outlaws properly. They rode until they were certain no one followed, eventually slowing near a small stream. Blood dripped from swords and battered shields. The men and women panted, eyes wide with the rawness of close combat. Brienne dismounted, wiping sweat from her brow. She spoke in a low voice to those who remained. "Check the wounded. We'll rest a short while and then return to Lord Rivers's holdfast." We need more men to finish this. Podrick helped remove the armor from one soldier who'd taken a nasty cut across his ribs. Ser Illifer bound the wounds of another who could barely hold himself upright. Brienne felt a stinging ache in her left arm. She'd taken a glancing blow from a spear that had pierced her mail. Blood trickled, but she could move the limb. She pressed a cloth to it, hissing at the pain. In the light of a single torch, Corvin approached, face pale. My lady, those outlaws, they fight with an almost fanatical zeal. It's not normal. Brienne nodded. I noticed. They kept calling out about reclaiming the Riverlands from northern rule. But it seems more than just regional pride. Perhaps they're being incited, or paid, or both. If we don't end this soon, trade convoys won't be safe and the region could spiral into chaos again. Corvin wiped sweat from his brow. What's our plan, then? She took a steadying breath. We'll ride back to the holdfast. Rally with Lord Rivers's men. Possibly send word to Riverrun for more support. We cannot let these sons of the Trident gain ground. No one questioned her judgment. They could see the necessity. Soon, they doused the torch, setting off under the cloak of night. Weariness pulled at them, but they pressed on with grim resolve. By dawn, they were within sight of Lord Rivers's walls again. The gates opened to admit them and shocked guards rushed forward to assist the wounded. News of the fierce battle spread quickly through the holdfast, rousing worry and anger in equal measure. Lord Rivers, summoned from his bed, arrived in the courtyard, robe hastily thrown over a tunic. By the gods, you look like you've been through hell, he exclaimed, eyeing the blood and grime. What happened? Brienne dismounted stiffly, grimacing at her wounded arm. We found the outlaws, or rather, they found us. They're more numerous than we feared and well coordinated. We lost men and some are injured. We need your aid and possibly more from Riverrun. Rivers pressed his lips together. I'll gather what forces I have, though my numbers are limited. As for Riverrun, Lord Edmure Tully rules there, but his capacity for swift action might be uncertain. Still, I'll send a raven immediately. Brienne nodded, grateful. Thank you. We must move quickly. They've already ambushed caravans. If we leave them unchallenged for too long, they may become bolder. While Rivers made arrangements, Brienne and Podrick went to see the local maester, a kindly older man named Maester Arland. He cleaned and stitched Brienne's wound, shaking his head at the spear's near-miss. Podrick hovered, concern etched on his face. You should rest properly, my lady, he said quietly after the maester finished. Let your arm heal. Brienne bit back a groan as she pulled her tunic back on. I'll rest when I can, Pod. We don't have the luxury of idleness. Podrick knew better than to argue. He helped her buckle the unbloodied portion of her armor back on, mindful of her bandaged arm. Then they left the maester's quarters and joined the others. Several soldiers were laid up in straw beds, moaning softly. The man with the arrow wound from earlier looked pale but alive, thanks to the maester's care. Brienne checked on each of them, offering a quiet word of thanks or encouragement. By midday, Lord Rivers had mustered 24 men-at-arms. A raven was dispatched to Riverrun, and he hoped for a reply within a day or two, perhaps more, depending on the messenger. Brienne considered their next move carefully. They needed to strike the outlaws before they vanished again, but charging headlong into the forest might lead to another ambush. If only they had someone on the inside, someone who knew where the Sons of the Trident camped, how they organized, and who their new patron was. She thought of the captive they had taken earlier who was now locked in the holdfast's small dungeon. Perhaps he would talk under the right pressure. Deciding it was worth a try, she made her way there with Podrick in tow. The dungeon was a cramped, dank space beneath the main keep, a single corridor of cells with iron-barred doors. The jailer stood aside as Brienne approached one cell. Inside, the battered outlaw sat on a straw pallet, arms bound behind him. He glowered when he saw Brienne. She crossed her arms, standing just outside the bars. Your ambush failed. Many of your comrades are dead. We know you're part of a larger group, led by someone. Tell me who is behind this. He spat at the ground. I won't betray my brothers. Brienne's mouth set in a hard line. Your loyalty is misplaced. The realm will not tolerate such violence. He sneered. You think the realm cared when the Riverlands were torn apart by your wars? Our people suffered while High Lords played their Game of Thrones. Now we take what's ours. Podrick's brow furrowed. That doesn't excuse murdering innocents. The outlaw gave a mirthless laugh. Innocents? The caravans we robbed belong to the north. They lord over us just like the Lannisters did. The phrase did, different names, same whips. Brienne gripped the bars, her voice cooling. Those caravans carried goods for all the realm, including the Riverlands. You're only hurting your own people by turning roads into battlegrounds. His scowl twitched. Our cause is just. When our patron arrives, you'll see. The Riverlands will rise. Who is this patron? Brienne demanded. A local lord? Someone from outside Westeros? He tightened his lips, refusing to answer. Brienne watched him in silence for a long moment, then exhaled softly. There's no reasoning with fanaticism, is there? She glanced at Podrick. We'll see if any of the other prisoners are more inclined to speak. The man just muttered something unintelligible. Brienne left him to stew in the darkness. They checked on the badly wounded prisoner next door, who had not yet regained full consciousness. No help there. Further questioning of the surrendered outlaw from the initial skirmish yielded only the same defiant remarks. It seemed the Sons of the Trident had stoked fervent hatred of outsiders, painting King Bran as a usurper and Sansa's caravans as symbols of foreign oppression. After finishing the interrogations, Brienne found herself outside, pacing along the walls of the holdfast. The autumn sky had turned a leaden gray, threatening rain. She thought of the parchment she'd found, the references to some unknown patron. Could it be a minor lord seeking power? A foreign envoy stirring trouble? Or even a rumored Targaryen loyalist from across the sea, hoping to destabilize Bran's reign? The possibilities weighed on her. Podrick approached, concern etched on his face. My lady, we have done all we can for now. We should take a moment to rest. You're wounded, and the men are exhausted. She acknowledged the truth in that. Her arm throbbed, and her body longed for respite. But duty burned brightly in her veins. We'll rest tonight. Then, if the Raven from Riverrun doesn't come by morning, we move on our own. We'll search the forest, burn out any camps we find, drive these brigands into the open. I won't let them terrorize the Riverlands. Podrick nodded. As you command. I'll tell the men. Night fell, and a drizzle of rain slicked the walls. Brienne forced herself to sleep in a small chamber within the keep, though her rest was uneasy, filled with fleeting dreams of outlaws swarming in endless waves. Before dawn, she rose and prepared, ignoring the sting in her arm as she strapped on her armor. She found a corner of the hall and tightened Oathkeeper's scabbard at her hip, steeling herself for another day of conflict. Just as she and her company prepared to set out once more, a cry came from the courtyard. A raven arrives from Riverrun. Soldiers ushered in the courier, who clutched a damp scroll. Lord Rivers joined Brienne to read it, holding the parchment near a torch. The letter bore Lord Edmure Tully's seal and apologized for his delay. He pledged a contingent of 50 men to assist in quelling the outlaws. They would march shortly but might take 2 days to arrive, given the distance. Brienne's shoulders sagged slightly with relief. With that many men, they could form a proper search. 2 days, she mused. We can either wait or try to do more reconnaissance on our own. Lord Rivers scratched his chin. Might be wise to wait. With your numbers doubled, success is more likely. But Brienne thought of the caravans, the possibility of fresh raids, and the chance that these Sons of the Trident might slip away for good if given time. We'll do a careful search of the wood, gather what intelligence we can, she decided. We won't engage in a large battle unless forced. Once Tully's men arrive, we'll finish this. So the next 2 days became a tense waiting game. Brienne and her knights led small expeditions into the forest, following tracks and examining abandoned huts, taking care never to overextend. They encountered scattered outlaws on one occasion, a brief skirmish that left 2 more brigands dead and 1 soldier wounded. The Sons of the Trident seemed content to evade rather than confront in large numbers. Finally, on the morning of the 2nd day, distant horns signaled the approach of Tully's forces. Brienne rode out with Lord Rivers to greet them, spotting banners of the leaping trout in the distance. Lord Edmure Tully himself was not among the riders. He had dispatched his nephew Ser Brinden Tully, named for the famous blackfish, no doubt, to command in his stead. This younger Brinden Tully was a sober, polite man who listened attentively as Brienne briefed him on the situation. We have intelligence that suggests the outlaws use multiple hideouts. There's an old mill by the riverbend, a brush hut closer to the road, possibly more. Their leader remains elusive, Brienne explained, showing him the map she recovered. These crosses indicate likely ambush points. Ser Brinden studied the parchment, nodding. We'll split our men into search parties, each led by one of your knights or ours. We'll corner the outlaws in a pincer movement. With luck, we can capture their leader and glean the identity of the so-called patron. The next day, the combined force, around 80 strong, began a systematic sweep. Lord Rivers remained behind to defend his holdfast, while Brienne, Brienne, and Podrick led separate wings into the forest. Trumpets sounded from time to communicate their positions, preventing friendly units from stumbling into each other. The plan was to converge upon the known hideouts simultaneously. Brienne's wing approached the old mill first. They found it abandoned again, though signs of recent activity littered the site: footprints, fresh ashes, scraps of cloth. Another false trail, she realized with mounting frustration. She led them onward, crossing the river at a shallow ford, each horse picking its way carefully for the stones. Water splashed up, dampening the rider's boots. Overhead, the sky had turned a steel gray, threatening rain once again. On the far side of the ford, they entered a denser stretch of woodland. The canopy overhead muted the daylight to a greenish dimness. The smell of wet leaves and moss pervaded the air. Brienne signaled for silence. The riders dismounted, proceeding on foot to avoid noisy hoofbeats that might betray them. She readied Keeper Podrick at her side. The rest followed, scanning every shadow. An hour passed in tense searching. Then they heard the sound of distant shouting, faint but distinct. Brienne froze, tilting her head. It came from somewhere north, perhaps a half-mile away. She motioned for her group to follow swiftly but quietly. Heart-pounding, she pushed through the undergrowth. The noise grew louder, voices raised in anger, clashing steel. At last, they emerged onto a slight rise overlooking a clearing. Below, Brendan's party had engaged the outlaws. A swirling melee raged among the trees and fallen logs. The sons of the Trident were numerous, but the Tully men fought with discipline. Still, the outlaws had them partially surrounded, and from this vantage, Brienne saw several Tully soldiers lying unmoving on the ground. Without hesitation, Brienne roared forward. "Aid them!" She led her knights in a downhill charge, the forest floor sliding underfoot, her shield raised. The outlaws turned in alarm, some scattering, others bracing for the impact. Brienne crashed into their flank like a thunderbolt, Keeper flashing. She parried a spear thrust, countered with a savage cut that felled her foe. Another outlaw lunged, and she caught him squarely with her shield, sending him sprawling. Podrick and the gold cloaks joined the fray, slashing and thrusting. Their arrival shifted the balance, relieving Brendan's men from the ring of attackers. Brendan himself, a tall, sandy-haired knight, locked eyes with Brienne in momentary relief before dispatching an outlaw who lunged at him. Still, the sons of the Trident fought with desperate resolve, hurling themselves at the combined forces. The forest echoed with cries of pain and the clang of steel. Rain began to drizzle from the darkening sky, making the ground slick and turning the battle into a slippery contest of footwork. Brienne nearly lost her balance once, but she planted her feet, smashing an outlaw's face with the rim of her shield. Amidst the chaos, she heard a harsh voice call out, "Brothers, stand firm." Turning, she glimpsed a figure that stood apart, a broad-shouldered man in heavier leather armor, brandishing a sword with a wave sigil scrawled on the crossguard. His face was hidden by a half-helm, but his bearing exuded command. Could this be their leader? She fought her way toward him, each stride contested by outlaws who tried to block her path. A wild-eyed woman swung a woodcutter's axe at Brienne's helm, forcing her to duck. She retaliated with a sideways chop that broke the woman's weapon and knocked her to the ground. Another outlaw tackled one of the gold cloaks behind her, grappling in the mud. Brienne pressed forward, determined, chest heaving with exertion. The leader saw her approach. He sneered, raising his sword in challenge. "Another lackey of the crown come to bleed the riverlands dry? You'll fail," he spat. Brienne responded by charging in, shield up. Their blades met with a metallic screech, and the shock vibrated down her arms. He was strong, surprisingly so, and skilled enough to test her defenses. They circled each other, exchanging blows in a deadly dance. She recognized a measure of training in his strikes, not a mere brigand's wild swings. Could he be a knight who had forsaken his vows? He aimed a slash at her bandaged left arm, exploiting her potential weakness. She blocked, grimacing at the pain that flared from her stitches. Then she countered with a powerful overhand chop. He twisted away, but Keeper clipped his shoulder, drawing blood. He hissed, staggering. Brienne advanced, giving him no time to recover. Sparks flew as their swords collided. Mud spattered their armor. The leader growled and came in low, trying to knock her off her feet. She shifted her stance, using her shield to slam him back. He stumbled, just enough for her to pivot and deliver a hard blow to his sword arm. He cried out, dropping the weapon. In a heartbeat, Brienne had the tip of Keeper pressed to his throat. "Yield," she commanded, breath ragged. The leader's eyes burned with defiance behind the visor. For a moment, she thought he might lunge at her barehanded, but he saw the array of knights and Tully men fending off the last pockets of resistance. His men were falling or fleeing. The sons of the Trident had lost this fight. He dropped to his knees, clutching his wounded arm. Rain streaked his helm, mixing with mud and blood. "Kill me, then," he snarled. "Another Riverlander dead for your false king." Brienne's joy tightened. "You will face justice, not a butcher's block. Surrender." He glared. Then he spat out a mouthful of blood and lowered his head. She stepped around him, knocking his helm off to reveal a scarred face, short-cropped dark hair, and a hateful glare. Two of her soldiers moved in to bind his arms. Around them, the battle waned. The outlaws who weren't dead or gravely wounded were taken captive, a few escaping into the pouring rain. Ser Brinden joined Brienne, breathing heavily, sword-stained with gore. "We owe you a debt, Lord Commander." "If you hadn't arrived," he trailed off, looking over the fallen Tully men. They were stronger than expected. Brienne nodded, sheathing Oathkeeper. Her limbs trembled from exertion and pain, but she held herself steady. "We have the leader alive. Maybe we can finally learn who's behind this conspiracy." Brinden looked at the man, who knelt in the mud, bound and furious. "We'll get the truth out of him." Together, they surveyed the aftermath. Bodies littered the clearing. The earth churned into a slick of blood and rainwater. Crows would soon gather. Brienne closed her eyes for a moment, praying silently for the souls of the fallen. Another tragedy in a land already drenched in sorrow. But at least the sons of the Trident were effectively broken. Their leader's capture was a decisive blow. They tended to the wounded and piled the dead for later burial. Then, in the dim, soggy twilight, the combined forces returned to the holdfast with their captives. Lord Rivers stood on the battlements, watching their approach, relief and horror mingling on his face at the sight of so many injured. Soldiers helped the wounded inside, and the rest gathered in the courtyard. Brienne had the leader thrown into a secure cell. Once she removed her dripping helm and shook out the water, she joined Ser Brinden, Podrick, and Lord Rivers in questioning the prisoner. He refused to speak at first, even under threat of execution for treason. Finally, Ser Brinden threatened to hand him over to the families of the men he'd murdered. That made him blanch. "All right," he spat. "All right. I'll tell you what I know." Brienne folded her arms. "Speak." The man glared at her. "We served a true lord who cares about the Riverlands, who doesn't bend the knee to cripples on thrones or northern witches. He's gathering strength to restore local rule. Our raids were meant to weaken the crown's hold. We were promised arms and gold if we sowed enough chaos." Ser Brinden scowled. "Who is this true lord?" The outlaw's lips twisted. "I never met him. Some say he's a Blackwood, or a Bracken, or a descendant of Heron the Black. Others say he's from across the sea. We only got orders through messengers. But I know he has money, more than a peasant lord should. And he's promised to come soon, to raise the Riverlands in open revolt." Brienne's mind churned. No name, only rumors. But it confirmed a bigger plot. "When is he coming?" The man shook his head. "Don't know. Next moon, next year, who can say? Our job was to cause trouble, prove that the Riverlands could still fight. When the time was right, he'd appear. That's all I know. Kill me if you want." Brienne exchanged a grim look with Ser Brinden, Podrick, and Lord Rivers. This conspiracy was bigger than they had feared, though they had cut off one branch by defeating the Sons of the Trident. Another threat might loom in the future. For now, however, the immediate crisis was resolved. They left the prisoner under heavy guard and exited the dungeon. The holdfast's halls were crowded with wounded men from the recent battle. Maester Arlen did his best, but the toll was high. Brienne felt the weight of each casualty, the price of preserving peace. She conferred with Ser Brinden, deciding they would remain a few days to bury the dead, treat the wounded, and ensure no remnant of the outlaws lurked. Then she would return to King's Landing to report all that had happened. During the time, Sansa's northern soldiers tended to their wounded comrades with stoic resolve. The Tully men prepared to march home once they were certain no further threats loomed. Brienne oversaw the burning of the outlaws' hideouts and the relocation of stolen supplies to rightful owners or to the holdfast storehouses for safekeeping. Lord Rivers expressed profound gratitude for the Crown's intervention. Finally, with the region stabilized, Brienne and her reduced but victorious band set out for King's Landing. The journey back felt heavier, for they carried the memory of lost soldiers and the knowledge of a hidden conspiracy. Rain continued in intermittent spurts, turning roads to mud. At times, they rode in silence, each person reflecting on the harsh reality of keeping the realm safe. On their approach to King's Landing, the city's walls came into view under a break in the clouds, sunlight illuminating the distant spires. Brienne felt a surge of conflicting emotion, relief at returning to safer ground, sorrow for the lives lost, determination to report her findings so that King Bran and Tyrion might take precautionary steps. She prayed the conflict in the Riverlands would not spill over into a wider rebellion. They entered through the gates, the guards saluting the battered knights. Word traveled fast that the Lord Commander had returned from a victory in the Riverlands. Small folk paused to watch the procession, some bowing, some whispering. Brienne ignored the attention, focused on her destination. She entrusted the wounded to the maesters at the Red Keep, ensuring they received proper care. Then she made her way to the throne room, requesting an immediate audience with the king and the Hand. Bran awaited her, posture serene upon the throne. Tyrion stood at his side, arms folded, brow creased. Ser Davos and others lingered. Brienne strode forward, still clad in muddy armor, a stark testament to the reality of conflict. She bowed. "Your Grace, the outlaw band in the Riverlands is defeated, their leader captured. But I bring troubling news." Bran's gaze flickered with interest. "Speak, Lord Commander." In succinct terms, Brienne recounted the raids, the battles, and the evidence of a larger scheme, how the Sons of the Trident believed in a mysterious patron who promised to restore the Riverlands' independence. Tyrion listened intently, interjecting only to clarify a point or ask for details. By the end, the hall felt hushed with tension. Tyrion rubbed his chin. Another pretender stirring discontent. "We've seen such things before, but we must take it seriously. The realm is weary of war, yet also vulnerable." Bran nodded, eyes distant. "We will investigate further. The Master of Whispers can focus on any rumors of wealthy benefactors, especially in the Riverlands or across the Narrow Sea." "Well done, Brienne. You have served the realm admirably once again." She bowed her head. "Thank you, Your Grace. I'm only sorry we lost good men." Bran's voice softened. "Such is the burden of keeping peace. Their sacrifice will be honored." With the immediate crisis resolved and a plan to address the hidden threat, Brienne finally allowed herself a measure of rest. She retreated to the Kingsguard tower, removed her armor with Podrick's assistance, and bathed off the dirt and dried blood. A sense of calm settled over her as she donned a fresh tunic and stood by a window overlooking the city. King's Landing stretched below in all its sprawling complexity. That night, she wrote a new entry in the White Book, recounting the campaign against the Sons of the Trident, the cunning of their attacks, the ferocity of the final battle. She left space for future developments, suspecting that this was not the last she would hear of rebellious stirrings in the Riverlands. But for now, she had done her duty. The following days returned her to the familiar routines of court life. Standing guard at audiences, overseeing training in the yard, patrolling the city to reassure the populace. Sansa had departed for the north in the meantime, but word reached Brienne that she made it home safely, carrying the news of the outlaw defeat. Davos maintained calm in the ports, and Tyrion juggled the realm's endless administrative tasks. Brienne spent spare moments reflecting on the outlaw's words about the next uprising. She did not relish the possibility of more bloodshed, but she was ready to act if called. In fleeting moments of solitude, her thoughts drifted to the roads she once roamed, the knights she once admired, and the vows she held close to her heart. Every swing of her blade, every stern command, every sleepless night, she endured them all to safeguard the weak, to defend what was right. As autumn waned and winter's edge approached, the city prepared for colder weather. Grain storages were inventoried, ships from the Reach arrived carrying supplies, and the King's Council worked tirelessly to ensure the realm stayed fed. Through it all, Brienne remained a constant presence. Tall, steadfast, an emblem of duty and honor in a land still healing from old wounds. Sometimes she thought she caught glimpses of Jaime Lannister's ghost in the corners of her mind, silently acknowledging how far she had come. One evening, after a particularly long day, she found Podrick in the training yard, practicing with a new recruit long after the others had gone to supper. The clang of wooden swords punctuated the dusky air. Brienne paused to watch, arms folded. Podrick executed a deft sequence of strikes, culminating in a disarm that sent the recruit's practice sword clattering. The young man blinked in surprise. Podrick offered a hand to help him stand. Brienne stepped forward, nodding in approval. "You've surpassed even my early expectations, Ser Podrick. Well done." He looked at her, slightly out of breath, a quiet pride in his eyes. "Thank you, Lord Commander. I only learned from the best." She felt her lips tug into a subtle smile. "You've come far. It warms my heart to see it." The recruit bowed sheepishly to Brienne, mumbled his thanks to Podrick, and scurried away for supper. Podrick and Brienne were left alone in the yard as the sky darkened to a rich blue. Torches flared along the walls. Podrick rolled his shoulder, placing the wooden sword aside. "My lady, how is your arm? Has it healed?" She flexed it experimentally. "Mostly. The maester's salves helped. It only aches in damp weather." He nodded, watching her. Then he ventured softly, "You seem troubled lately. Is it the threat in the Riverlands or something else?" She hesitated before answering, glancing around to ensure no one else was near. "I worry for the peace we've built, Pod. So many forces could tear it apart. The Ireborn, rebellious Riverlanders, petty lords seeking advantage. We might have to fight again and again until we're all weary of the sword." Podrick's expression turned thoughtful. "Yet you remain vigilant. And because of that, the realm stands a better chance. We can't prevent all ill, but we can do our part." She released a slow breath. "Yes, you're right. I just sometimes wonder, will there ever come a day when I can lay down Oathkeeper knowing the realm is truly safe?" Podrick's gaze held gentle understanding. "If that day comes, you'll have more than earned your rest." In the silence that followed, Brienne lifted her eyes to the stars just emerging above. She remembered nights under those same stars, traveling with Jaime, with Sansa, with Arya, each step a quest to protect those she cared about. Now she stood within the Red Keep, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, shaped by every victory and every sorrow that had led her here. There might be new dangers lurking, new rebellions brewing, but she would face them all with the same unwavering resolve. She placed a hand on Podrick's shoulder. "Thank you, Pod. Truly. Let us get some supper and rest. The new day will bring its challenges soon enough." Together, they left the yard. The Red Keep corridors glowed with torchlight, and a sense of guarded peace settled over the castle. Brienne walked with shoulders high, every inch the knight she had dreamed of being, every inch the leader she had proven herself to be. In her wake trailed the whispers of courtiers who had once doubted her. "There goes the tall woman who commands the King's Guard, the woman knight who broke bandit armies and safeguarded the king's peace." She neither craved nor scorned their murmured awe, she only carried on, guided by her oath. And so the days continued, quiet at times, perilous at others, yet always weaving the tapestry of a realm seeking to mend its fractures. In that tapestry, Brienne of Tarth stood at the center, a stalwart thread of honor and devotion, determined to ensure that the realm's people could sleep at night without fear of swords at their door. Hers was a story that blended humility and courage, forging something rarely seen, a Kingsguard truly worthy of its name, led by a knight who had fought tooth and nail for every scrap of respect and who gave all she had to defend those who needed her most. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the wind rustled against the battlements and all was still, Brienne would sometimes think of how fate had carried her from Tarth's peaceful shores to Renly's Rainbow Guard, to battles across half the realm, to kneeling at King Bran's side, sword in hand. She remembered the scornful laughter of her youth, the mocking lords who had once refused to see her as anything but a foolish girl. Now she commanded knights who would follow her into fire. She had bested criminals, conspirators, and cynics alike, forging a future that shone with a glimmer of hope. The White Book, too, slowly filled with new entries documenting her deeds, line after line capturing the essence of a life dedicated to chivalry. Whenever she set quill to parchment, she recalled her first uncertain dreams of knighthood and how it felt to be scorned at every turn. Yet each inked page bore testament to her truth, that a knight's worth lay not in fame or birth, but in steadfast devotion to an ideal. If she could inspire others to walk that same path, then all her scars and struggles were worth it. Sometimes she would stand by King Bran's throne during a lull in court sessions, scanning the faces of visiting nobles and recalling how fragile alliances could be. She could feel the weight of Oathkeeper at her side, the legacy of House Lannister's gift, the memory of Jaime's redemption. At times, she imagined his voice encouraging her, reminding her that in a world of broken vows, her honor stood unshaken. She would glance over at Podrick or Ser Alisanda or the other knights who had come to respect her. That was enough to stir her courage. Anew. Days rolled into weeks, weeks into months. Rumors came and went, some sensational stories of foreign princes or unscrupulous lords, but none ignited a full-blown crisis. The Ironborn mostly kept their uneasy truce, and the trouble in the Riverlands remained quelled. The king's court managed a semblance of stability, guided by Tyrion's cunning and Bran's uncanny wisdom. Through it all, Brienne was there, constant, a pillar of reassurance to the small folk and a symbol of quiet strength to the nobility. When winter finally brushed its chill over King's Landing, the city shuddered under winds seldom felt so far south. Log fires crackled in the Red Keep and thick cloaks replaced lighter garb. Brienne found the cold bracing, a small reminder of the north, of the battles she had fought against the true winter that once threatened all life. This cold was milder, but it still pricked her old wound, sending sharp aches through her arm. She endured it, seeing it as another test of resolve. In the evenings, she might walk the battlements alone, hearing the howling wind and gazing at the stars. She would think of the shape of things to come, whether she might one day pass on Oathkeeper to a worthy successor, whether the realm would finally know a generation free of devastating wars. She hoped so with all her heart. But if conflict came again, she would be ready, as she had always been. Word eventually reached her that Sansa prospered in Winterfell, forging strong alliances with neighboring lords. Arya was rumored to be exploring lands beyond the known seas, seeking new horizons. The news gladdened Brienne, knowing that the girls she had sworn to protect were living their lives on their own terms. That vow, once so heavy on her heart, now felt lighter, satisfied by time and victory. Yet new vows bound her here, in King's Landing, ensuring King Bran's safety, guiding the Kingsguard to restore its lost luster. More often than not, she stood at the king's side during court, or oversaw the training yard, or inspected city defenses. Merchants came to respect her fairness, the small folk to trust her presence, and many knights to envy her skill. She wore the envy lightly, she had no taste for vanity. On an unremarkable afternoon, sometime after the snows dusted the rooftops and the days grew short, Brienne rode through the city with a small escort. She wanted to see how the outer wards fared in the chilly weather, to speak with the lower rank of gold cloaks, to ensure they treated the people justly. She passed throngs of citizens bundled in worn cloaks, hawkers selling roasted chestnuts, children playing in half-melted snowbanks. Now and then someone pointed and murmured her name. She paid no attention, only forging ahead with that quiet determination so characteristic of her. When she reached a rundown alleyway where the city's poorest huddled, she dismounted, telling her escort to wait. She walked among the lean-tos and ragged tents where the hungry and destitute looked on with dull eyes. One man recognized her from a prior patrol, hailing her timidly, asking if the king's men could spare any bread or blankets. She promised to speak with the city stewards about distributing supplies, though in truth resources were strained. A woman with 2 children tugged at Brienne's cloak, tears in her eyes, thanking her for driving out the Black Fists so many months ago. "My sister was threatened by them. She can keep her stall open now," the woman said. Brienne offered a soft, reassuring word and pressed a few coins into her hand. It was not enough to change their lives, but it was something. As she walked back to her horse, she felt a mixture of sadness and resolve. This was what she fought for, not the glory of battles, but the simple, unspoken relief of people who no longer lived in daily fear. She promised herself she would mention the plight of these folk to Tyrion. Perhaps something could be done. Even if the city could never fully banish poverty, they could at least ease its grip. She rode on, eventually returning to the Red Keep as dusk settled. She went about her usual evening duties, briefing the king, checking on the Knights Guard rotation, ensuring no pressing crises demanded her attention. Finally, in her private chambers, she removed her armor, feeling every bruise from old battles, every ache from old wounds. The cold made her scarred arm stiff, but she stretched it gently. She sat at a small wooden desk, lighting a single candle. Its warm glow flickered across her solemn features. She opened the white book, turning to the pages where her own story and those of her knights were recorded. Fresh lines described the defeat of the Sons of the Trident, the re-establishment of secure trade routes, the continued vigilance against threats abroad and at home. They were words that might be read by future generations, perhaps long after she was gone. She took up her quill and added a new entry, a quieter one, detailing how the city had entered winter with minimal unrest, how the Kingsguard remained diligent, how she continued her daily watch. There was no dramatic battle to chronicle this time, only the slow, steady work of maintaining peace, a victory in its own right. When she finished, she laid the quill aside and ran her fingertips over the ink, the lines that spoke of her devotion. She thought of how many pages were left in the white book, how many more days or years she might stand guard here. The future was uncertain. Yet her vow was unwavering, and so was her heart. Extinguishing the candle, she rose and gazed out the window. The snow had begun to fall again, dusting the courtyard in pale flakes. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the bells of the city ring the hour. The hush of winter night descended like a gentle blanket, muffling the usual clamor of King's Landing. Brienne of Tarth, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, allowed herself a rare, small smile. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new tests of her leadership, and potentially new dangers for the realm. But as long as she drew breath, she would stand as a shield between the innocent and the cruel, between chaos and order, upholding the ideals that had guided her from the moment she first picked up a sword. And in that quiet moment, she felt at peace with who she had become. No longer just the maiden of Tarth who dreamed of knighthood, but a knight indeed, shining true amidst a world forever on the brink. If any threatened the realm again, be they lords, outlaws, or foreign invaders, they would face Brienne's blade and the unwavering resolve behind it. For honor was not something she merely preached. It was the essence of her being, pulsing in her every breath. Thus ended another day in the life she had chosen, another chapter in a story that stretched ever onward. She turned from the window, mind set on rest, body craving sleep. The candle's smoke curled in the air, a fleeting wisp that vanished into darkness. Yet the light she carried within, fueled by courage, shaped by loyalty, burnished by love for those she protected, would never waver. So long as Westeros needed her, Brienne would stand her post, oathkeeper in hand, heart unbowed, ready for whatever the dawn might bring.